If you're listening to this episode as it drops, this week is JordanCon 2023. I will be there, so come and say hi. My social battery is better than last year, at least I think so, and I have stickers and magnets to give away. I also have 5 keychains with my Micah Valier logo and the words "Fuckery will abound." They are first come, first serve, so if you like one, hit me up at the con ASAP. The keychains and other merch will be available to purchase later on, but I haven't gotten it all sorted out yet, and even though it's been 6 months since I promised you merch, I figured getting this episode launched before JordanCon was the priority. And with that, let's have an episode. The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. I could start my intro with a Wheel of Time fact. Welcome to the 42nd episode of Podcast of the Dragon. The fires of heaven? More like the fires of rage that are constantly alight in Nynaeve's heart so that she can be a force of major badassery. In this episode, I explore the journey that Robert Jordan takes our wisdom on as he gives her the chance to finally be a main character. While it is not always the case, particularly not later on in the series, there are books in the Wheel of Time where Robert Jordan chooses to zero in on one or two individuals, devoting himself to their development. Other significant characters must grow as they can throughout the course of the story. You might even say that he gives the book to us through them, as opposed to when he's focusing on an individual, such as in The Eye of the World or The Great Hunt, where the vast majority of the narrative is presented through Rand's eyes. He might be said to be giving us the character through the book. And if that is the case, The Fires of Heaven is the book where, RJ being ready for her to start growing as a person, we are finally truly presented with Nynaeve. I last really checked in with Nynaeve in episode 20 while discussing The Dragon Reborn. But because that is an Egwene-focused episode, I kept my examination of Nynaeve mostly confined to the context of their relationship. So it is worth going back into that book, because RJ makes some significant revelations. She only gets 2 point of views in The Dragon Reborn. In the first, she's in the kitchen in the White Tower where she, Elaine, and Egwene are working as punishment for running away. And she's full of resentment and especially angry at Laris, the mistress of the kitchens, whose attentions she feels she should not have to suffer. It says, "It was bad enough being bullied and chivied by Aes Sedai. She had to put up with that, however much it rankled and burned, if she was to learn how to use her abilities. Not that she liked what she could do. It was one thing to know Aes Sedai were not dark friends for channeling the power, but quite another to know she herself could channel. Yet she had to learn if she was to get back at Moraine. Hating Moraine for what she had done to Egwene and the other Emond's Fielders, pulling their lives apart and manipulating them all for Aes Sedai purposes, was nearly all that kept her going." In Nynaeve's second point of view, she's in Tyr, and we come in on her while she's in the market buying meat from the butcher shortly before Juilin Sandar brings her back to Mother Gwenna's house, and she discovers that he's betrayed them to the Black Aja. She's having a very furious conversation with herself and getting all riled up to the point where she starts muttering aloud as she's walking back. It says, "That Moraine. If she had never come to Emond's Field, I could have taught Egwene enough. And I could have done something. That she knew neither was true did not help. It made it worse. She hated Moraine almost as much as she hated Leandrin and the Black Aja, maybe as much as she hated the Shan-Chen. And then she turns the corner and runs into Julin. This second quote takes place almost 3 months before the start of the Fires of Heaven, and it shows us a pretty standard view of Nynaeve as we have come to know her up to this point, raging at all the things that make her feel frustrated, hurt, wronged, or robbed of her agency. There's not a ton that stands out. What is far more telling is the first quote, where Nynaeve says that all that is keeping her going is this hatred for Moraine. What a subtle reference that's just there and gone to show us how much Nynaeve is struggling out in the world, far from home and lost, unable to attain the goal that she set out with to find these kids and bring them back. And so she is feeling totally overwhelmed, and this small bit Jordan provides us gives the impression that she would be completely dragged under by her anxiety, that her anxiety might even have morphed into despair, if not for this hatred that she has for Moraine. So she stokes it, because anger is how she keeps her anxiety at bay. Beyond that, Nynaeve has a learning disability when it comes to her channeling that requires her to be in a state of emotional turmoil. In order to embrace Saidar, she has to have her brain basically short-circuit. She cannot just go from step 1 to step 2 like a regular channeler. She needs something to break her concentration so that she doesn't get pulled under by the absolute terror that fills her. Not just her fear of channeling, but all of the anxiety she buries beneath her rage, because basically she exists with this choice of feel angry and function, or feel fear and be paralyzed. RJ doesn't do a ton of character work with Nynaeve in The Shadow Rising, but he does do a little, and he sets up part of it in this second point of view in Book 3, where he has her raging as she's walking back to Mother Gwenna's. She's hating Moraine, but she also thinks of how she hates the Black Aja and the Shan-Chen, laying the groundwork for meeting Egianan in Tanchico, someone that Nynaeve really takes to, and so feels incredibly betrayed by once she learns her identity. RJ gives us this bit in Tel Iran Riyadh after they've discovered that Egianan is Shan-Chen in Book 4. Nynaeve's waiting for the Wise Ones and Egwene to show up, where Amis will tell her about need, and she will go on to use it to find the Domination Band. It says, "For a moment Nynaeve stood in the heart of the stone, not seeing it, not thinking of Tel Iran Riyadh at all. Egianan was Shan-Chen, one of those vile people who had put a collar on Egwene's neck and tried to put one on hers, knowing it still made her feel hollow. Shan-Chen, and she had snaked her way into Nynaeve's affections. True friends had seemed so few and far between since leaving Emond's Field. To find a new one and then lose her in this way. I hate her for that worst of all," she growled, folding her arms tightly. "She made me like her, and I cannot stop it. I hate her for it." Said aloud, it made no sense at all. "I do not have to make sense." She laughed quietly with a rueful shake of her head. "I am supposed to be Aes Sedai." So, it's fun to have Nynaeve actually talk out this recipe for the boiling stew of emotions cooking in her head and admit, well, this doesn't really compute, and then shrug and say, fuck it, it's just me, myself, and I here in this magical dream world, and anyway, I'm supposed to be acting like I'm Aes Sedai. And she doesn't have any kind of real respect for them or find them particularly impressive, so she's like, if they represent the bar that I have to clear, I don't have to make any fucking sense because fuck them, which, fair. Anger is essential for Nynaeve's survival, especially because, as we see further in this scene in Tel Iran Riyadh, she gains an enemy who she cannot easily outmatch. She's doing her blind steps with need and comes across Moghedien in the Panarch's palace in the World of Dreams, and it short-circuits the compulsion that Moghedien put on her and Elaine when she went and visited them at the Three-Plum Court, giving Nynaeve access to some cringingly humiliating memories and making her insanely angry. And she assumes that Moghedien's a member of the Black Aja because a Forsaken would not occur to her. And she's like, I'm gonna annihilate her. She's apoplectic with rage because interfering with Nynaeve's agency and making her look like an idiot is unforgivable. And so she goes to fuck her up, and Birgitte from the shadows is like, no, why don't you come through this door? Let's have a conversation about this, because you're going to be real fucking sorry otherwise. So, learning that Moghedien is an F-word slows Nynaeve's roll, and lets her know that they are in way more danger in Tanchico than they realized. And her anger, which was a necessary tool to unlock her ability, becomes an absolutely essential part of her arsenal that she can't afford to not have on dial 24/7. And while Nynaeve is pretty good at finding ways to upset herself, one of the reasons Swan was so dismissive of her protests about being sent after full Aes Sedai, it's like, meh, you've got a temper problem and a bigger cannon, and you'll be fine. She deals with a double-edged sword in her fear. She can get angry at herself for being afraid, but fear can also erode her anger. When Nynaeve and Elaine go and perform their heist in the Panarch's palace, and Nynaeve goes to get the bands in the museum, she comes across Moghedien dressed up as a serving woman. Nynaeve doesn't recognize her at first, so she keeps dusting the artifacts with her feather duster, figuring this servant will fuck off after a minute, and then she'll be able to grab the bracelets and the necklace. And it says... Suddenly she saw the woman's face clearly. Sturdily handsome, framed by dark braids, smiling in an almost friendly fashion, but not really paying her any mind. Certainly not threatening in any way. Not quite the same face, but she knew it. Before thought, she struck out, weaving a hammer-hard flow of air to smash that face. In an instant the glow of Saidar surrounded the other woman. Her features changed. Somehow more regal now, prouder. Moghedien's face remembered. And startled as well, surprised that she had not approached unsuspected, and Nynaeve's flow was sliced razor clean. She staggered under the whiplash recoil like a physical blow, and the Forsaken struck with a complex weave of spirit streaked by water and air. Nynaeve had no idea what it was meant to do. Frantically she tried to cut it as she had seen the other woman do, with a keen-edged weave of spirit. For a heartbeat she felt love, devotion, worship for the magnificent woman who would deign to allow her to... The intricate weave parted and Moghedien missed a step. A tinge remained in Nynaeve's mind, like a fresh memory of wanting to obey, to grovel and please. What had happened at their first meeting all over again. It heated her rage. The knife-sharp shield that Egwene had used to still Amiko Nagoyan sprang into being, more weapon than shield, lashed at Moghedien, and was blocked, woven spirit straining against woven spirit, just short of severing Moghedien from the source forever. Again the Forsaken's counterblow came, slashing like an axe, intended to cut Nynaeve off in the same way. Forever. Desperately Nynaeve blocked it. Suddenly she realized that under her anger she was terrified. Holding off the other woman's attempt to still her while trying to do the same to her took everything she had. The power boiled in her till she thought she must burst. Her knees quivered with the effort of standing, and all went into those two things. She could not spare enough to light a candle. Moghedien's axe of spirit waxed and waned in sharpness, but that would not matter if the woman managed to drive it home. Nynaeve could not see any real difference in outcome between being stilled by the woman and merely being shielded and at her mercy. The thing brushed against the flow of power from the source into her like a knife hovering over a chicken-stretched neck. The image was all too apt. She wished she had not thought of it. In the back of her mind a tiny voice gibbered at her. "Oh, Light, don't let her. Don't let her. Light, please, not that." For a moment she considered letting go of her own attempt to cut Moghedien off. For one thing, she had to keep forcing it back to a razor edge. The woven flows did not want to hold the keenness. Letting go and using that strength to force Moghedien's attack further back, maybe sever it. But if she tried, the other woman would not need to defend. She could add that strength to her own attack. And she was one of the Forsaken, not just a Black Sister. A woman who had been Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends, when Aes Sedai had been able to do things undreamed of now, if Moghedien threw her whole strength at her. So, Moghedien then begins to villain monologue, and Nynaeve, listening to her, is like, why the fuck does she keep talking? And it suddenly dawns on her, we're equally matched here. And because Nynaeve is incredibly smart and good at thinking outside of the box, she's like, okay, she's going to pull a little Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope. She sags against the ropes, and then when Moghedien goes to press her advantage, she grabs the domination band and beans her in the face with it, which knocks Moghedien off balance and lets Nynaeve shove the shield home. And then just after that, all hell breaks loose, because everybody feels these two women channeling a large amount of the one power, and lo and behold, here's Deanna Cade laying down suppressing fire with the balefire hose, and so Nynaeve has to run for it, so she doesn't get burned out of existence, and in the ensuing chaos, Moghedien is able to untie the knot and escape. So Nynaeve ends the Shadow Rising pretty pumped from capturing Moghedien, while also upset that she wasn't able to get her out and bring her back for trial. And maybe that failure is why RJ shows her admitting fault to Elaine when she joins her at the rendezvous point. As Elaine asks her, where the fuck have you been? It says, Moghedien found me, and because I was worrying about how to bring her out for trial, Gianna Cade nearly took my head off with balefire. Elaine gave a small squeak, and she hurried to reassure her. It didn't really come close to me. You captured Moghedien? You captured one of the Forsaken? Yes, but she got away. There, she had admitted everything. Conscious of all their eyes on her, she shifted uncomfortably. She did not like being in the wrong. She especially did not like being in the wrong when it was she who had pointed out that it was wrong in the first place. Elaine, I know what I said about being careful, but once I had her in my hands, it seemed all I could think of was bringing her to trial. Taking a deep breath, Nynaeve made her voice apologetic. She hated doing that. Where were those fool men? I endangered everything because I didn't keep my mind on what we were about, but please don't scold me. I won't, Elaine said firmly, so long as you remember to be careful in the future. Egianan cleared her throat. Oh, yes, Elaine added hastily. The waiting seemed to be getting to her. There were spots of color in her cheeks. And Elaine changes the subjects and is like, oh, did you get the stuff? She's red-cheeked, and Egianan is clearing her throat because Elaine was only supposed to try to get Amathera if there were no Black Aja present. And instead she's like, well, it only feels like there's one person channeling in there, so I'm going to go in anyway. I don't have very much sympathy for anybody who struggles to admit when they're wrong. I'm aware that a lot of people have a problem with it, and I cannot empathize. I do not understand why it's hard. How is it so hard to just be like, yeah, I fucked up, it was wrong? To me, it shows a lack of humility and a fragility of ego, and I don't get it. So it makes me very impatient with people who can't do it. Particularly because being able to admit that you're wrong is one of the simplest ways to make people like you. How is it really that difficult? It makes you look childish when you can't. And Nynaeve saying that she especially hates doing it when she's the one who has to admit it? That makes it sound like she hates it less if someone else points it out, but you know that isn't true, unless she prefers it so that she can deflect or change the subject, or pull some Darvo shit, that favorite tool of narcissists and abusers everywhere, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. That's bullshit. Suck it up and admit when you're wrong. It's really not that fucking hard. And if it is that hard, practice makes perfect, It's not going to kill you. And you will be a much more likable person if you are capable of doing it. And admittedly, if the people around you are toxic and are always trying to make you admit it when they're the ones who are blatantly wrong and they don't give a little, fuck those people, then you don't have to do it. But if you are always the one who won't admit you're wrong and everybody else is giving a little, learn the fucking ability. Otherwise, you're an asshole. Anyway, it's really nice that RJ shows Nynaeve gaining some caution and some self-doubt, which is more than can be said for Elaine, who Nynaeve informs us at the beginning of her point of views in the Fire of Heaven feels like they should add Moghedien to the list of people they're searching for along with the Black Aja. And Nynaeve thinks Elaine's an idiot for wanting to do that, because, yeah, Nynaeve is technically hunting Moghedien, but there's a subtle distinction, because she's not hunting her like a bounty hunter, it's more like she wants eyes on the dangerous creature that's stalking her. Hunting the Black Aja is a duty, and hunting Moghedien is life or death, and that uncomfortably certain threat means that Nynaeve is in a unique emotional state at the start of Book 5. For safety's sake, she now needs to be constantly angry, partly because they are in greater danger than ever, but also because her fear is closer to the surface, so she has to fight that as well as everything else. Poor Nynaeve. Because The Fires of Heaven is a book of growth for Nynaeve, Robert Jordan cleverly, just as the stakes are so high for her and fuel for her anger is so very necessary, removes a fundamental part of her identity at the start of the story. It says, when she had left the two rivers, it had been to protect young people from her village, snatched away in the night by an Aes Sedai. She had gone to the tower still with the hope that she could somehow shelter them, and the added ambition of bringing down more rain for what she had done. The world had changed since then, or maybe she only saw the world differently. No, it is not me that's changed. I'm the same. It is everything else that's different. Now it was all she could do to protect herself. Rand was what he was, and no turning back, and Egwene eagerly went her own way, not letting anyone or anything hold her back, even if her way led over a cliff. And Mat had learned to think of nothing but women, carousing, and gambling. She even found herself sympathizing with Moraine sometimes, to her disgust. At least Perrin had gone back home, or so she had heard through Egwene second-hand from Rand. Perhaps Perrin was safe. Hunting the Black Aja was good and right and satisfying and also terrifying, though she tried to hide that part. She was a grown woman, not a girl who needed to hide in her mother's apron. Yet that was not the main reason she was willing to keep on bashing her head against a wall, keep on trying to learn to use the power when most of the time she could not channel any more than Tom. That reason was the talent called healing. As wisdom of Emond's Field, it had been gratifying to bring the women's circle around to her way of thinking, especially since most were old enough to be her mother. With not many years on Elaine, she had been the youngest wisdom ever in the Two Rivers, and even more so to see that the village council did what they should, stubborn men that they were. The most satisfaction, though, had always come from finding the right combination of herbs to cure an illness, to heal with the one power. She had done it, fumbling, curing what her other skills never could. The joy of it was enough to bring tears. So Nynaeve is letting this grudge she holds against Moraine go. And RJ here is foreshadowing that there may actually come a time when she is happy and moves through the world for herself rather than for other people, which is good because she deserves to be happy. She deserves to be a comfortable person who is settled in herself and doesn't need to be angry all the time just to be able to function. At the same time, this is problematic because he's removing one of the main ways that she gets angry. She can no longer upset herself by saying, "That fucking Moraine, she did this to us and I'm so mad." He's removing it just as she has this clear and present danger from Moghedien and needs her rage fires to be constantly alight. So he explores other ways of engendering her anger, and in doing so, Robert Jordan paints Nynaeve in a very unflattering light throughout a large portion of this book, with her contradictions and her insecurities put on full display, and he does that by having Elaine start to lose patience with her and her point of views, and by having Nynaeve start seeing her own flaws and hypocrisies. And he has her start admitting things to herself, things that Nynaeve, who is not a self-aware person for the most part and does not like to admit when she's wrong, especially when she's the one doing the admitting, hates having to acknowledge. And in doing all of those uncomfortable things, she comes across as almost comically childish at times, and everybody around her gets to pay the price for her dysfunction. Because one of the best go-tos that Nynaeve has for getting her temper up is to fan her frustrations with other people, which is really low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, how many of us are just like, fucking people, god damn. But Nynaeve can't just hop on Twitter and spend a couple of minutes doom-scrolling through toxic bullshit to stir up her rage and discontentment. She has to work with what she's got, which are the people nearest to her. We begin our Nynaeve point of views in Chapter 8, which is called Over the Border. They've just left a group of bandits in the dust of a power called Windstorm. We don't see this. We're arriving just after the fact. And it says, she had been surprised at being able to raise such a storm. Once whipped up full of her fury, it held a life of its own. Elaine had been startled at the size of it too, though thankfully she had not let on to Tom or Julian. But even if her strength was increasing, her teachers in the tower had said that it would, and certainly none of them was strong enough to best one of the Forsaken as she had. Even with that, she still had that limitation. Had any of the bandits appeared, Elaine would have had to deal with them alone, and she did not want that. Her earlier anger was gone, but she was making fine for another crop. Awkwardly climbing up over the canvas lashed across the load of casks, she reached down to one of the water barrels fastened along the sides of the wagon, together with the chests of their possessions and supplies. Immediately her hat was on the back of her head, held only by the scarf. Her fingers could just touch the lid of the barrel, unless she released the rope that she was gripping with her other hand, and the way the wagon was lurching along that would probably send her off onto her nose. Julian Sandar guided the lanky brown gelding he was riding. Skulker was the improbable name he had put on the animal, close to the wagon, and reached over to hand her one of the leather water bottles slung about his saddle. She drank gratefully, though not gracefully. Hanging there like a bunch of grapes on a wind-blown vine, she spilled nearly as much water down the front of her good gray dress as she did down her throat. It was a suitable dress for a merchant, high-necked, finely woven and well-cut, but still plain. The pin on her breast, a small circle of dark garnets and gold, was perhaps too much for a merchant, but it had been a gift from the Panarch of Terrebonne, along with other jewelry, much richer, hidden in a compartment beneath the wagon-driver's seat. She wore it to remind herself that even women who sat on thrones sometimes needed to be taken by the scruff of the neck and shaken. She had a little more sympathy for the tower's manipulations of kings and queens, now that she had dealt with Amathera. She suspected that Amathera had meant her gifts as a bribe to make them depart Chanchico, The woman had been willing to buy a ship so that they would not remain an hour more than necessary, but no one had been willing to sell. The few vessels remaining in Tanchico harbor that were suitable for more than coasting had been jammed with refugees. Besides, the ship was the obvious way, the fastest way to leave, and the Black Aja might well be watching for her and Elaine after what had happened. They had been sent to hunt Aes Sedai, who were dark friends, not to be ambushed by them. Thus the wagon and the long trek across a land torn by civil war and anarchy. She was beginning to wish that she had not insisted on avoiding ships, not that she would ever admit it to the others. When she tried to hand the water bottle back to Julian, he waved it away. A tough man, seemingly carved from some dark wood, he was not very comfortable on the back of a horse. He looked ridiculous to her, not because of his obvious ill-ease in the saddle, but for the silly red tarabonner hat that he had taken to wearing on his flat black hair, a brimless conical thing, tall and flat-topped. It did not go well with his dark Terran coat, tight to the waist, then flaring. She did not think it would go well with anything. In her opinion, he looked as if he were wearing a cake on his head. It was clumsy scrambling the rest of the way forward with the leather bottle in one hand and her hat flapping, and she did it muttering imprecations for the Terran thief-catcher, never thief-taker, not him, for Tom Marilyn, puffed-up glee-man, and for Elaine of House Trakand, daughter-heir of Andor, who ought to be shaken by the scruff of the neck herself. She meant to slide onto the wooden driver's seat between Tom and Elaine, but the golden-haired girl was pressed tightly against Tom, her own straw hat hanging on her back. She was clutching the white-mustached old fool's arm as if afraid of falling off. Tight-mouthed, Nynaeve had to settle for Elaine's other side. She was glad she had her hair in one proper braid again, wrist-thick and hanging down to her waist. She could give it a tug instead of thumping Elaine's ear for her. The girl had used to seem reasonably sensible, but something seemed to have addled her wits in Tanchico. "They aren't following us anymore," Nynaeve announced, pulling her hat back into place. "You can slow this thing down now, Tom." She could have shouted that from the back and not needed to clamber over the casks, but the image of herself bouncing about and calling for them to slow had stopped her. She did not like making a fool of herself, and liked even less others seeing her in a foolish light. "Put your hat on," she told Elaine. "That fair skin of yours will not appreciate this sun for long." As she had half expected, the girl ignored her friendly advice. And then RJ gives us our first taste of Elaine crooning and hanging on Tom. Ugh. Jordan in this passage lays out a number of the frustrations and anxieties that live in Nynaeve's head, which she has to hand to rile herself up, her rage-kindling, so to speak. She's angry about the poor options they had for travel. She's afraid of looking stupid, foolish, or even messy. She couldn't bear to shout for Tom to slow down, because the picture in her mind's eye of the woman hanging on a rope calling for him to slow is of someone weak and silly, someone who is providing fodder for others' amusement. She hates the fact she's spilling water down her dress. She doesn't want to look unkempt where she could be judged or seen in a ridiculous light. She gets angry about bullshit nobles, fucking nobles, fucking rulers, fucking Amathera, acting like assholes. And lastly, she fuels her rage by thinking lots of shitty thoughts about all of her companions. She's mentally shredding Julian for his clothing choices, his poor skill at riding, and at what he named his horse. She really hates his hat. It makes him look fucking stupid. It clashes with his coat. Ugh, his ensemble, he looks ridiculous. And then she's like, oh, he's a fucking thief-catcher, never a thief-taker, which is a somewhat more legitimate irritation, because Julian's insistence on that distinction is obnoxious. It's as if he's a state cop, and whenever people call him a police officer, he interrupts and says, actually, I'm a trooper. A trooper is still a police officer. And I can sympathize about being very particular about certain distinctions like that, but not about actually saying anything. Julian is an adult and should suffer in silence. Nynaeve agitates herself by thinking about the fact that Tom's pretty fucking pretentious, a demeanor that is totally in line with the court bard he once was, but Nynaeve doesn't know about that yet, so she's annoyed by the preposterousness of what is admittedly absurd behavior from a glee man. He is so puffed up, he's a pompous asshat, he thinks he knows everything. And then, of course, she cultivates her bad mood by dwelling on Elaine's behavior, which at the moment is frankly worthy of anger. But she doesn't just spam her rage button by focusing on the way Elaine's behaving. She comes forward and makes a suggestion that she knows Elaine is going to ignore. because while it might be made in good faith, it's suggested in the imperative mood. It's a direction. Put your hat on, your fair skin won't like the sun. And however true her statement is, and however helpful it might be, you don't make suggestions in an imperative fashion. Anything you tell someone in the imperative is an order. And she half expects that Elaine is going to ignore her advice, because of course she is. Nynaeve's telling her what to do with her own body, and it's almost like Nynaeve suggested it in that fashion, partly because that's just Nynaeve's way, but also because she knew Elaine would ignore her, and then she could get mad about it. And this is a running theme for Nynaeve through this book. It's very normal for her to behave in a shitty fashion to most people, but the near constant inner dialogue of garbage thoughts about her companions and the general petty meanness of it is very unique to this book. And I don't know if it's just that she's always thought this way about people and it's only in this book that RJ lays it bare, but I don't think so. I think that because she's in a bad mental place right now, her anxiety is up, she's in a state of high alert, and she's not happy about the situation that they're in. She's in a negative thought spiral, and she's thinking deliberately shitty things about her companions because it helps her stay mad. But it can't be her default way of looking at them, because I don't think Jordan wants people to dislike Nynaeve, and what he's displaying here, having a constant, unkind internal litany about people you supposedly care about, is super unlikable behavior. And plenty of people overlook it. Nynaeve is one of his most beloved characters. And partly I think that's because there are a lot of people who've been looked down on, or downtrodden, or pushed around by their elders, or men in power, or whoever. And Nynaeve is someone who refuses to be pushed, and so people take inspiration from a character like that. They're like, yeah, Nynaeve doesn't fuck around. She doesn't let people push her. She finds a way to stand her ground even when she feels overwhelmed. So they either identify with her as someone who has been dismissed and infantilized, or they want to be more like her, someone who stands up for herself and for other people. And so they overlook a lot of the shitty behavior that she engages in, because she has many admirable traits. Just like I will happily acknowledge that Elaine has shitty traits, and Egwene has shitty traits. My favorite characters have shitty traits, and I recognize that. But I am prone to gloss over them because of the things that I like about them so much. And also because my favorite characters tend to be characters that a lot of people dislike, so I don't need to delve deep into the failings of Elaine or Egwene. Their haters do that endlessly, so I focus on what makes them great. But Moraine, my most favoritist, isn't loathed the way Elaine and Egwene are, and I've shredded her for her faults in numerous episodes. The point I'm trying to make is that while there's no doubt that RJ loves Nynaeve, he's always showed us a very flawed person, and in this book he's taking her negative traits and dialing them up to 11. We're not just treated to a constant inner litany of shitty thoughts, she's regularly punching down at the men. Jordan has her in the Shadow Rising insist on absolute obedience if Tom and Julian want to accompany them to Tanchico. She's like, you will agree to do exactly as you were told, or the sea folk are going to leave your asses on the dock and you will watch us sail away. And that is all well and good and necessary to avoid being undermined. Her reasoning to Elaine was absolutely right. She tells her, Tom knows we're not Aes Sedai, so Julian will know, and they're going to be second-guessing us all the time unless we get an agreement of obedience. Absolutely perfect reasoning, and I agree with her. And for the most part, her behavior toward the men in Book 4 is reasonable-ish. It's baseline normal Nynaeve behavior. She's gruff with them and occasionally lashes out, but acts no worse than you expect her to based upon how you know her throughout the first few books. But in the Fires of Heaven, she's starting to behave in a way where she's being shitty just because she wants to be mad about things. When they're in Sienda and they're trying to figure out what to do about Galad, Tom and Julian come into the room and Elaine says, Tom, Galad's here. You must remember what a little shit he was as a kid. And they have their little moment of, I thought you forgot. I remembered in Tanchico, mustache tug. So they're discussing their options for being able to leave. And Julian says, I could get close enough to crack his head. If you were ready, you could drive off during the confusion. I could catch you up on the road. Nynaeve sniffed loudly. How? Gallop after on Skulker? Even if you didn't fall out of the saddle inside a mile, do you think you would even reach a horse if you attacked a white cloak in the street? Galad was still there across the street, and Trom had joined him, the pair apparently chatting idly. She leaned over and yanked Tom's nearest mustache. Do you have anything to add? Any brilliant plans? Did all your listening to gossip yield anything that might help?" He clapped a hand to his face and gave her an offended look. "Not unless you think there's help in Ileron laying claim to some border villages in Altara, a strip the whole length of the border from Saladar to Soeben to Mosra. Is there any help in that, Nynaeve? Is there? Try to pull a man's mustache out of his face? Somebody ought to box your ears for once." The "for once" that Tom gives us is very telling of how over the men are of being Nynaeve's punching bags. The previous day, as they're driving towards Sienda, before they encounter the menagerie on the road, RJ paints the scene showing the fallout of Elaine being the lady and Nynaeve being the lady's maid, and the night before at the inn in Bellon, where the innkeeper insists that only Nana can know how to serve the Lady Morellin. And I read part of it last episode where Elaine explains in her narrative why Nynaeve is acting like a dick, and then calls her out. But before we get the background, RJ gives us a cold open where Elaine is watching the countryside roll past and trying to ignore Nynaeve's sour face. It says, "Is my lady bored?" Nynaeve asked acidly. "The way my lady is staring at the countryside down my lady's nose, I think my lady must want to travel faster." Reaching back over her head, she pushed open a small flap and shouted, "More speed, Tom! Don't argue with me! You hold your tongue too, Julin thief-catcher! I said more speed!" The wooden flap banged down, but Elaine could still hear Tom muttering loudly, cursing very likely. Nynaeve had been barking at the men all day. A moment later his whip cracked, and the coach racketed ahead even faster, rocking so hard that both women bounced on the golden-colored silk seats. The silk had been thoroughly dusted when Tom bought the vehicle, but the padding had long since gone hard. Yet, jounced about as she was, the set of Nynaeve's jaw said that she would not ask Tom to slow again right after ordering him to go faster. So, Elaine gets to deal with this very horrible, sarcastic lady's maid from the Blight, and the men get a more straightforward piling on of abuse because Nynaeve is so upset. And while it's fair for her to be upset about what happened is nobody's fault. Sometimes, when faced with a situation like this, fuckery will abound. It's the law of unintended consequences. It is what it is. And Nynaeve could have let Elaine offset things by, say, letting her handle her own bath once the inn's maids had fucked off out of the bathing room, and letting her sleep in the trundle. Elaine made a number of attempts to compensate for the innkeeper's bullshit and to unfuck Nynaeve's choice to speak up and say, "As you wish, and my lady is most particular," instead of keeping her fucking mouth shut like an actual maid would have done. But no. Nynaeve instead has to act like a child and an asshole about something that's nobody's fault and punish all of her companions for it. So Elaine finally gets fed up. And I read the bit last episode where Elaine finally tells her, "Hey, I've been thinking, we shouldn't just go back to the tower until we have a better idea of what's going on." And Nynaeve's response is, "Oh, you've been thinking, you must have a headache." And Elaine finally is like, "Be quiet, you're acting like a fucking child and I'm sick of it. How about let's go change? I'll be the maid and you be the lady. Anything for you to stop acting like a child." And at that point, once Nynaeve is shown she has no leg to stand on, she's been called out, her irrationality has been ticked off point by point, and she has been given a path to role reversal so she can no longer weaponize this unfortunate situation. She has no excuse whatsoever in her slightest dreams to be able to hold to this behavior anymore and must stop. And so she yells at Tom, "Hey, slow down, are you trying to kill us, fool men?" And Elaine thinks to herself that there's dead silence, but that the men have to be talking. The guys have basically settled into a situation here where no matter what, everything that they do will be wrong, because Nynaeve has to be pissed off. She has no choice. She has to be pissed off about everything now because she needs to have her power ready to hand. And the men are easy targets, because men be like this and women be like that, and Nynaeve especially having to deal with a group of shithead men in a village where the government is divided into a matriarchal half and a patriarchal half, and the matriarchal half feels like it has the right to a certain extent to dictate the way in which the patriarchal half functions, she has a certain view of the stupidity of the way that men operate. And there are people who say Robert Jordan's characters are misandrist or that Nynaeve is very sexist. And I suppose that's technically true if you step back and just look at it at face value, then sure, that's sexism right there. But RJ didn't take Nynaeve and say, "I'm going to write this character and she will be sexist toward men, that will be one of her traits." I don't think that that's what's happening with her at all. I feel like Robert Jordan is expressing commentary through her character about how he felt regarding patriarchal systems and the confines of masculinity in general. And if you read the origins of the Wheel of Time, Michael Livingston draws parallels between both Tolkien and Jordan, being veterans of wars, and how, having experienced the inevitable conflicts wrought by patriarchy, they felt the world might be a better place if it were run by women. And I'm going to pass on a joke that my mother was particularly fond of when I was a kid, and it's dated, so I'll just ask you to pardon it for being a smidge misogynistic and also trans-exclusionary, sorry in advance. But my mother told me once that if women ruled the world, there would be no wars, just tense negotiations every 28 days. And, apologies, not all women have periods, and the stereotype that periods make women grouchy and combative is a harmful one that the patriarchy loves to weaponize to dismiss and belittle women's legitimate grievances, but my mother was notoriously grouchy on her period, so she found that joke hilarious. But RJ expresses throughout the series his belief that women are better at being cooperative. They're better at working together, there's less of a chance of everything blowing up or falling to shit. Which is not innate, it's everything to do with how men and women are socialized, and the havoc wreaked upon us all, thanks to toxic masculinity. And so he uses a number of the women, but the character of Nynaeve in particular, to make commentary on how he feels like patriarchy functions and men operate. Anyway. So the men are easy targets just for being men. And Elaine is also an easy target. And it's like, set aside Elaine's behavior with Tom, that is a 100% legitimate reason for Nynaeve to be upset. There's no reason to criticize Nynaeve for saying fuck that noise. And RJ has her deal with that shit show that he chose to write in a surprisingly tactful fashion. And while she makes a handful of annoyed references to it in her internal narrative later on, she doesn't fixate on it. Instead, she fixates on something Elaine has no control over, just as with Tom and Julian. Nynaeve is obsessed with Elaine's nobility. She is always talking about her mother's palace. In the prologue of Lord of Chaos, Elaine is complaining to Min that Nynaeve can't go 2 fucking seconds without mentioning that she's the queen's daughter, and she assumes that Nynaeve has some kind of complex about it. She tells Min she can't forget that I'm her queen's daughter. You don't do that. And Min replies, maybe it's because I'm not fucking impressed by it. Your mother's writ doesn't go very far in Barrelon. And Elaine, being a monarchist who believes in maths, has an instant sense of being miffed before she corrects herself, understanding that if you want loyalty, you need to provide services, and anyway, I'm not working as the queen right now, so let's not think about that. But what reason would there be for Nynaeve to constantly bring it up? The only thing that Elaine can think of is that Nynaeve is somehow obsessed specifically that Elaine is her queen's daughter. And the actual problem is that Nynaeve just hates nobles and she hates rich people. She needles Elaine because she's a queen's daughter. And if Elaine understood that was the issue, that would really, really hurt her feelings. She's like the celebrity's daughter, and Nynaeve comes across to Elaine like the insecure friend who keeps bringing up who her famous mother is all the time completely out of context. And all Elaine can reasonably conclude is that the fixation is due to Nynaeve's relation to the celebrity, like she's her mom's biggest fan, or in this case because her mom's the queen, that Nynaeve's her subject and can't get past that, when actually it's just that she detests the wealthy, nobles, and people in power. She doesn't have the open disgust for them that Matt does, but she doesn't think highly of them. And you see that a little bit in her first point of view when she's thinking how dealing with Amathera makes her more sympathetic to how the White Tower treats rulers. But those feelings are due to actual behavior from Amathera. This is just a deep-seated prejudice that she has, and so Elaine would never understand. It's not that she's combating a sense of awe over who your mom is. She doesn't give a fuck about that. She just seriously dislikes this thing that you have absolutely no control over. You didn't choose what you were born into. And there are a lot of people who would just shrug off Elaine's inevitable pain were she to learn Nynaeve's true opinions, because they act like her wealth and her privilege means that she's not entitled to be wounded or feel upset that someone she thinks is a friend looks down on her for her nobility. They'd give a Nynaeve-style sniff and think how sad for her. And I am as eat the rich as the next raving leftist. But what I hate about wealthy people in the United States is how they hoard wealth and don't pay their fair share of taxes the way the rest of us do, and how they enrich themselves off the labor of underpaid workers. But actually being born into wealth is as uncontrollable as being born poor. And I had a friend many years ago who was literally the nicest, purest person I ever knew in my entire fucking life. And she was born ridiculously wealthy. Like, grew up in a gated compound, went to boarding school, lived off her trust fund and filled her time with philanthropy, absurdly wealthy, absolutely one of the 1%. And we had a conversation at one point where she told me it took me years and years and years to get to the point where I stopped apologizing to people for having money. It took a lot of time and effort and therapy to get to the point where I stopped being ashamed for this thing that isn't my fault. And I'm finally in a place where if people judge me negatively for it, that's their problem. I shouldn't have to be constantly apologizing for it. I just need to do my best to be ethical about it. And because I knew her personally, and because I knew the way that she conducted herself, she was the type of person who would give you the shirt off her back, and overall one of the kindest and most empathetic people I ever knew in my entire life. Because of that, I think, have sympathy for Elaine when a lot of people just kind of dismiss her because, well, she's this rich girl, she has privilege. Well, I once was very good friends with a rich girl who had a lot of privilege, and she was one of the finest people that I've ever known in my life. And so I guess that changes my perspective compared to a lot of people. And beyond that, Elaine would and tries to help anybody in need. Nynaeve is the one who looks down on poor people. She's the one who gives Luca a single penny and then mocks him for refusing work and having to beg when he offered to work for the money that he asked them for. He's like, let us perform for you, please. You do us a great favor letting us give you a show for a trifle, offering to let them pay less than what would be his going rate. And while it might not be traditional work, it's still work. Ask any fucking actor, any dancer, or any other type of performer how hard they work. He was offering to work for money, and Elaine would have loved to see his show, but didn't have the time. So she proposed to donate money to help him out of a sense of duty toward the needy and because she has the means. She's not a noble in this land. She may not have an official obligation, but these people are desperate. They had all of their money taken away because they're in a country with bullshit laws. They had an accident happen, and it's right that they pay for damages, but then the officials extorted the show folk and took all of the rest of their money for the fines. The overwhelming majority of what cost Luca money was fines, which is absurd. So Elaine's just sort of like, of course, let's give him some money to help him on his way to Geldon. But any emotions that Elaine exhibits that Nynaeve doesn't have an instant contextual understanding of, Nynaeve just shrugs off as being due to, her nobility or the fact that she's wealthy, and then just kind of looks down on her. Like, look at her being all outraged because Gareth Bryn dismisses her. Nobody's probably ever been so curt to her when she's such a high rank. And it's just like, dude, somebody who's been in her life forever basically told her, fuck you, I don't even know you anymore because your mom hurt my fee-fees. Christ, Nynaeve, could you be any more fucking heartless? So, yeah, I'm all about the principle of eat the rich when it comes to the American system and late-stage capitalism, but an individual person doesn't choose to be born into wealth, and you don't have to shit on her for something that's not her fault when she does her best to use her money to help other people. She's trying to be a good rich person, and Nynaeve could fucking acknowledge that. But The Fires of Heaven is a book of growth and acknowledgement for Nynaeve overall. Back in Mardison, after Rhonda McCura is questioned, how long have you been working for the Black Aja? And she's like, whoa, I work for the Yellow Aja. We drugged you because we got told to look out for Blondie there. She's a runaway accepted. So they go downstairs to the kitchen after they tie up Rhonda and Lucy, and it says as Nynaeve's poking through the cupboards, Tom, Nynaeve said, lifting the lids on various containers and peering in. Julian. She paused, took a deep breath, and still not looking at the two men, said, thank you. I begin to see why Aes Sedai have warders. Thank you very much. And a bit further it says, the two men stared at one another in open amazement. They had surely been ready for the usual rough side of Nynaeve's tongue. Elaine was almost as shocked. Nynaeve liked having to be helped as much as she liked being wrong. Either made her as prickly as a briar, though of course she always claimed to be a picture of sweet reason and sense. And a bit further it says, Nynaeve, what do you think that message means? All sisters are welcome to return to the tower. It makes no sense. That was not what she wanted to say, but at least she was closing in on it. The tower has its own rules, Tom said. What Aes Sedai do, they do for reasons of their own, and often not for those they give, if they give reasons at all. He and Julian knew they were only accepted, of course. That was at least part of why neither man did as he was told nearly as well as he might. The struggle was plain on Nynaeve's face. She did not like being interrupted, or people answering for her. There was quite a list of things Nynaeve did not like, but it was only a moment since she had thanked Tom. It could not be easy to call down a man who had just saved you from being hauled off like a cabbage. Very little in the tower makes sense most of the time, she said sourly. Elaine suspected that the tartness was as much for Tom as the tower. Do you believe what she said? Elaine took a deep breath. About the Amerlin saying I was to be brought back by any means. The brief look Nynaeve gave her was touched with sympathy. I don't know, Elaine. She was telling the truth. Julian turned one of the chairs around and straddled it, leaning his staff against the back. I've questioned enough thieves and murderers to know truth when I hear it. Part of the time she was too frightened to lie, and the rest too angry. The pair of you. Taking a deep breath, Nynaeve tossed the scrip onto the table and folded her arms as if to trap her hands away from her braid. I am afraid Julian is probably right, Elaine. But the Amerlin knows what we are doing. She sent us out of the tower in the first place. Nynaeve sniffed loudly. I can believe anything of Swan Sanche. I would like to have her for 1 hour where she could not channel. We would see how tough she is then. Elaine did not think that would make any difference. Remembering that commanding blue gaze, she suspected Nynaeve would earn a fine lot of bruises in the unlikely event that she ever got her wish. But what are we going to do about it? The Ajas have eyes and ears everywhere, it seems, and the Amerlin herself. We could have women trying to slip things into our food all the way to Tarvalin. Not if we do not look like what they expect. Lifting a yellow jug out of the cupboard, Nynaeve set it on the table beside the teapot. This is white hen pepper. It will soothe a toothache, but it will also turn your hair black as night. Elaine put a hand to her red gold tresses. Her hair, not Nynaeve, she would wager, but as much as she hated the idea, it was a good one. A little needlework on some of those dresses in the front, and we are not merchants any more, but 2 ladies traveling with their servants. Riding on a wagon-load of dye, Julian said. Her level look said gratitude for saving her extended only so far. There is a coach and a stable-yard on the other side of the bridge. I think the owner will sell it, if you go back to the wagon before somebody steals it. I do not know what got into you two, just leaving it for whoever came along. If it is still there, you can take one of the purses. So in that passage, R.J. paints a beautiful picture of the struggle of Nynaeve admitting that she needed help, thanking the guys for it, and simultaneously shit-talking a choice they made that had to be done in order to save them. And he's showing us the struggle that she's having through Elaine's eyes, who isn't quite as fed up with Nynaeve as she'll be in a few days, but she has Nynaeve's number pretty well. She's at the point where she's definitely not nearly as tolerant of Nynaeve's behavior as she was when they were getting on the Seafolk ship back in Tyr. So she's thinking, yeah, there's quite a list of things that Nynaeve doesn't like, and the tone of that is the tone of someone who's definitely no longer water off a duck's back. Nynaeve's temper is not associated with awesomeness the way it used to be. It's now associated with bullshit. But having her admit to needing help here, and thank Tom and Julian for it, is useful foreshadowing, since Nynaeve is faced with a similar situation while leaving Samara, as they head toward the ship so they can go to Saladar. She's relying on people with martial skills to get them from the menagerie to the docks, fighting through a horrible mob and afraid to channel for fear of attracting Moghedian, which has to be a really shitty situation, knowing you have the capacity to make everything not necessary, but you can't afford to do it. So they fight through a whole bunch of terrible fanatic people and kill most of them, and then it says, she had no idea how long it had taken. Some of the Shinerans were leaning on their swords, panting, and eyeing Galad with a good deal of respect. Tom was bent over with one hand on his knee, trying to fend Elaine off with the other while telling her he just had to catch his breath. Minutes, an hour, it could have been either. For once, looking at the injured men lying on the pavement here and there, the one crawling away, she felt no desire to heal, no pity at all. Not far off was a pitchfork where someone had flung it. A man's severed head was impaled on one tine, a woman's on another. All she felt was queasy and grateful that it was not her head. That and cold. "Thank you," she said aloud to no one in particular, and to everyone. "Thank you very much." The words grated a little. She did not like confessing something she had not been able to do for herself, but they were fervent. Then Birgitta nodded in acknowledgment, and Nynaeve had a struggle with herself. But the woman had done as much as anyone, considerably more than she herself. She thrust her belt-knife back into its sheath. "You shot very well." With a wry grin, as if she knew exactly how difficult those words had been, Birgitta set about recovering her arrows. Nynaeve shuddered and tried not to watch. So R.J. has Nynaeve move through this book gaining a more realistic vision of herself and her capabilities. Another of Nynaeve's traits that R.J. highlights in Book 5 is her deep fear of feeling stupid and being laughed at. When she and Elaine see the signal in Martison and go into the shop to talk to Rhonda McCura, Nynaeve gives her the passphrase. It says, "I want a dress embroidered with yellow roses on the bodice," Nynaeve told her. "But no thorns, mind," she added with a laugh. "I don't heal very fast." What she said did not matter, so long as she included yellow and heal in it. Now, if only that bunch of flowers was not happenstance. If that was the case, she would have to find some reason not to buy a dress with roses, and a way to keep Elaine from recounting the whole miserable experience to Tom and Julian. Everything that we know of Elaine means she would never do that. Elaine would understand how awful being mocked for a mistake would make Nynaeve feel, and so she would not do that, even if she were fed up with her temper. Elaine is diplomatic and cares about other people's feelings enough to not do something like that. And Nynaeve should know that too, because earlier in the chapter, as they're getting their campsite set up, they're getting cleaned, and Elaine is washing her face and hands, and Nynaeve says, "Yo, do I get a chance to wash?" And it says, Elaine emptied and refilled the bucket herself. She was a very nice girl usually when she remembered that she was not in the royal palace in Camelin, and when she was not acting the fool. That Nynaeve would take care of when Tom came back. So, in other words, when Nynaeve stops thinking shitty things based on her prejudices and assesses Elaine on pure character, she sees that she's a good person who always makes the extra effort. Nynaeve's desperate fear of looking stupid leads into one of the most pivotal scenes in the book, which is her conflict with Egwene in Tel Riyadh. And because that scene has many layers of what the fuck, I'm going to hold RJ much harder to account for authorial intent than basically anywhere else in the book series. I'm normally pretty content to play fast and loose with authorial intent. I bounce from examining Jordan's purpose with his writing to treating characters like they're actual people responsible for the choices they make, and taking the clay of characterization and scene to talk out and extrapolate what might happen off the page, which I suppose is sort of oral fan fiction, but whatever, it's entertaining and aids my understanding of the characters and appreciation of the story, and it's fun to share it with all of you. And such an extrapolation exemplifies what an organic and living story The Wheel of Time is. But there are times in the series where the author's intention must be probed, particularly if he's having people behave in ways that are out of character. And this scene is one. Jordan lays the emotional groundwork for what happens between Egwene and Nynaeve in Elaita's study during the official meeting in the Heart of the Stone. Nynaeve talks to Birgitte first, before Egwene and the Wise Ones show up, and Birgitte tells her, "I've seen a whole bunch of the Forsaken around, I've seen them plotting with each other, but I've seen no sign of Moghedien," which means either she hasn't been in Tel Riyadh, or she knows that I'm looking for her. And then Birgitte fucks off, and while Nynaeve's waiting for Egwene and the Wise Ones to show up, she begins playing dress-up in Tel Riyadh. This is the book where she begins noticing and appreciating clothes. RJ actually highlights this when she goes into Rhonda McCura's shop. But Nynaeve tries on a Dream Domani dress, and she's thinking about how Lon would look at it and then fuck the shit out of her. And then Egwene shows up. And it says, "What under the light is that you have on, Nynaeve?" Egwene asked in scandalized tones. Nynaeve leaped straight up, spinning, and when she came down facing Egwene and Melaine, it would be Melaine, though none of the Wise Ones would have been any better. The mirror was gone, and she was wearing a dark woolen Two Rivers dress thick enough for the depths of winter. Mortified at being startled as much as anything else, it was mainly at being startled, she changed the dress instantly without thinking, flashing back into the gossamer domani and just as quickly to the yellow terebinth on her folds. Her face flamed. They probably thought her a complete fool. And in front of Melaine at that. The Wise One was beautiful, with her long red gold hair and clear green eyes. Not that she cared a whit how the woman looked, but Melaine had been at her last meeting here with Egwene too, and taunted her about Lon. Nynaeve had lost her temper over it. Egwene claimed they were not taunts, not among Aiel women, but Melaine had complimented Lon's shoulders and his hands and his eyes. What right did that green-eyed cat have to look at Lon's shoulders? Not that she had any doubts of his faithfulness, but he was a man and far away from her, and Melaine was right there, and firmly she put a stop to that line of reasoning. "Is Lon—" She thought her face was going to burn off. "Can't you control your own tongue, woman?" But she would not, could not back away, not with Melaine there. Egwene's bemused smile was bad enough, but Melaine dared to put on a look of understanding. "Is he well?" She tried for cool composure, but it came out strained. "He is well," Egwene said. "He worries about whether you were safe." Nynaeve let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The waste was a dangerous place even without the likes of Couladin and the Shido, and the man did not know the meaning of caution. He was worried about her safety? Did the fool man think she could not take care of herself? "We finally reached Amadicia," she said quickly, hoping to cover herself. A flapping tongue and then sighs. The man has stolen my wits. There was no telling from the others' faces whether she was succeeding. A village called Sienda, east of Amador. White cloaks everywhere, but they don't look at us twice. It is others we have to worry about. In front of Mullane she had to be careful, to bend the truth a little in fact here and there, but she told them of Rhonda McCura and her odd message and her trying to drug them. Trying, because she could not make herself admit in front of Mullane that the woman had succeeded. Light, what am I doing? I've never lied to Egwene before in my life. The supposed reason, the return of her runaway accepted, certainly could not be mentioned, not in front of one of the wise ones. They thought that she and Elaine were full Aes Sedai, but she had to let Egwene know the truth of that somehow. It might have to do with some plot concerning Andor, but Elaine and you and I have things in common, Egwene, and I think we should be just as careful as Elaine. The girl nodded slowly. She looked stunned, as well she might, but she seemed to understand. A good thing the taste of that tea made me suspicious. Imagine trying to feed fork root to someone who knows herbs as well as I do. Schemes within schemes, Mullane murmured. The Great Serpent is a good sign for you Aes Sedai, I think. Some day you may swallow yourselves by accident. We have news ourselves, Egwene said. Nynaeve could see no reason for the girl's haste. I am certainly not going to let the woman bait me into losing my temper, and I certainly wouldn't get angry over her insulting the tower. She took her hand away from her braid. What Egwene had to say put temper right out of her head. Couladin crossing the spine of the world was surely grave, and Rand following scarcely less so. He was pushing hard for the Jangay Pass, marching from first light until after dusk, and Mullane said they would soon reach it. Conditions in Cairhien were harsh enough without a war between Aiel on its territory, and a new Aiel war to come, surely, if he tried to carry out his mad plan. Mad. Not yet, surely. He had to hang on to sanity somehow. How long since I was worrying how to protect him, she thought bitterly, and now I just want him to stay sane to fight the last battle. Not only for that reason, but for that one too. He was what he was. The light burned me. I'm as bad as Swan Sanche or any of them. It was what Egwene had to say about Moraine that shocked her. She obeys him? She said incredulously. Egwene gave a vigorous nod in that ridiculous Aiel scarf. Last night they had an argument. She's still trying to convince him not to cross the dragon wall, and finally he told her to stand outside until she cooled down. She looked about to swallow her tongue, but she did it. She stayed out in the night for an hour anyway. It is not proper, Mullane said, resettling her shawl firmly. Men have no more business ordering Aes Sedai about than they do wise ones, even the Kara Karn. They certainly do not, Nynaeve agreed, then had to clamp her mouth shut to keep from gaping at herself. What do I care if he makes her dance to his tune? She has made all of us dance to hers often enough, but it was not proper. I do not want to be Aes Sedai, just to learn more about healing. I want to stay who I am. Let him order her about. Still, it was not proper. So this passage highlights all of this awkwardness and discomfort that Nynaeve has, and hatred of feeling foolish or looking foolish to the point that she will lie. And it's an inexcusable lie from her perspective, because it's not a necessary lie. It's not a lie to protect anyone's identity. It's not a lie passing themselves off as Aes Sedai to give themselves a little bit more authority out in the world. And it's not a convoluted story to pass off Brigida's intelligence about the Forsaken like it's her own, because Brigida's help is contingent upon keeping her identity a secret. Nynaeve tells them, "Oh, I saw these Forsaken. They're doing things. I think they're planning something," and hopes that they don't wonder how she'd know who was who, since Moghedien and maybe Asmodean are the only ones she'd actually know on sight. And it says, "Have you been wandering the world of dreams?" Mullane's eyes were green ice. Nynaeve met her level stare for level stare, despite Egwene's rueful head-shaking. I could hardly see Ravin and the rest without it, now could I? Aes Sedai, you know little and you try too much. You should not have been taught the few pieces that you have. For myself, I sometimes regret that we agreed even to these meetings. Unschooled women should not be allowed in Tel Iran Riyadh. I have schooled myself in more than you ever taught me. Nynaeve kept her voice cool with an effort. I learned a channel on my own, and I do not see why Tel Iran Riyadh should be any different. It was only stubborn anger that made her say that. She had taught herself to channel, true, but without knowing what it was that she was doing, and only after a fashion. Before the White Tower she had healed sometimes, but unaware until Moraine proved it to her. Her teachers in the tower had said that was why she needed to be angry in order to channel. She had hidden her ability from herself, afraid of it, and only fury could break through that long-buried fear. So you are one of those the Aes Sedai call wilders. There was a hint of something in the last word, but whether scorn or pity, Nynaeve did not like it. The term was seldom complimentary in the tower. Of course, there were no wilders among the Aiel. The wise ones who could channel found every last girl with the spark born in her. They claimed also to find every girl without the spark who could learn if instructed. No Aiel girl died trying to learn by herself. You know the dangers of learning the power without guidance, Aes Sedai. Do not think the dangers of the dream are less. They are just as great, perhaps more, for those who venture without knowledge. I am careful, Nynaeve said in a tight voice. She had not come to be lectured by this sun-haired vixen of an Aiel. I know what I am doing, Melaine. You know nothing. You are as headstrong as this one was when she came to us. The wise one gave Egwene a smile that actually seemed affectionate. We tamed her excessive exuberance, and now she learns swiftly, though she does have many faults still. Egwene's pleased grin faded. Nynaeve suspected that grin was why Melaine had added the last. If you wish to wander the dream, the Aiel woman went on, come to us. We will tame your zeal as well and teach you. I do not need taming, thank you very much, Nynaeve said with a polite smile. Annalain will die on the day he learns that you are dead. Ice stabbed into Nynaeve's heart. You are a dirty fighter, she muttered. Melaine corked an eyebrow. Do we fight? If we do, then know that in battle there is only winning and losing. Rules against hurting are for games. I want your promise that you will do nothing in the dream without first asking one of us. I know Aes Sedai cannot lie, so I would hear you say it. Nynaeve gritted her teeth. The words would be easy to say. She did not have to hold to them. She was not bound by the 3 oaths. But it would be admitting that Melaine was right. She did not believe it, and she would not say it. She'll not promise, Melaine, Egwene said finally. When she gets that muley look, she wouldn't come out of the house if you showed her the roof on fire. Nynaeve spared a piece of glare for her. Muley, indeed, when all she did was refuse to be pushed about like a rag doll. After a long moment, Melaine sighed. Very well, but it would be well to remember, Aes Sedai, that you are but a child in Tel Riyadh. Come, Egwene, we must go. An amused wince crossed Egwene's face as the two faded away. And Egwene's wince is because Melaine dresses Nynaeve as a child, which she's done before, and Nynaeve got out of Egwene what it was that she had done. So she's emotionally riled and off balance even before she meets up with Egwene in the White Tower. RJ shows here a serious degradation of Nynaeve's capacity for self-delusion. She knows she's full of shit and admits it to herself. And while she feels like she has the right to choose her own risks, she's still too dismissive of them. So she decides to go to the White Tower to do her own reconnaissance and see if she can find any clues about what the fuck is going on. Her attempt to jump straight to the Amerlin study is thwarted by the change in decor, so she dreams herself into the Mistress of Novice's study instead, and then puts on Melaine's face and an acceptance dress as a disguise, before walking up to what she thinks is still Swan's office. And while she's poking around, Egwene, who is also costumed as a red-haired accepted, comes in, and she's like, Dude, if Melaine knew you were using her face, you'd be in so much trouble. She'd do way worse than dress you like a child fucker. And it says, You nearly frightened 10 years out of me, Nynaeve muttered. So the wise ones have finally decided to let you come and go as you please? Or is Melaine behind? You should be frightened, Egwene snapped, color rising in her cheeks. You are a fool, Nynaeve. A child playing in the barn with a candle. Nynaeve gaped. Egwene berating her? You listen to me, Egwene Alvir. I'll not take that from Melaine, and I won't take it from... You had best take it from someone before you get yourself killed. I ought to take that stone ring away from you. I should have given it to Elaine and told her not to let you use it at all. Told her not... Do you think Melaine was exaggerating? Egwene said sternly, shaking her finger almost exactly like Melaine. She was not, Nynaeve. The wise ones have told you the simple truth about Tel Riyadh time and again, but you seem to think they're fools whistling in a high wind. You were supposed to be a grown woman, not a silly little child. I vow whatever sense you once had in your head seems to have vanished like a puff of smoke. Well, find it, Nynaeve. She sniffed loudly, rearranging the shawl on her shoulders. Right now you were trying to play with the pretty flames in the fireplace, too foolish to realize you might fall in. Nynaeve stared in amazement. They argued often enough, but Egwene had never, ever tried to dress her down like a girl caught with her fingers in the honey jar. Never. The dress. It was the acceptance dress she was wearing, and someone else's face. She changed herself back to herself, and a good blue wool that she had often worn for circle meetings and to put the council straight. She felt robed in all her old authority as wisdom. I am well aware of how much I don't know, she said levelly, but those I yield. Do you realize you could dream yourself into something you could not get out of? Dreams are real here. If you let yourself drift into a fond dream, it could trap you. You'd trap yourself until you died. Will you— There are nightmares walking, Tel Iran Riyadh, Nynaeve. Will you let me speak? Nynaeve barked, or rather she tried to bark it. There was rather too much frustrated pleading in there to suit her. Any at all would have been too much. No, I will not, Egwene said firmly. Not until you want to say something worth listening to. I said nightmares, and I meant nightmares, Nynaeve. When someone has a nightmare while in Tel Iran Riyadh, it is real too, and sometimes it survives after the dreamer has gone. You just don't realize, do you? Then Egwene sets the melty, rapey dream monsters on her, and Nynaeve is too scared and too panicked to vanish them, and has to beg Egwene's help. And it is super fucked up. But what was Robert Jordan's intent with the scene? Taken at face value and any intentions aside, what unfolds in this scene is a sexual assault. But unless someone is a lazy writer with a fetish who loves to pepper their story with gratuitous rape scenes, you don't use sexual assault in your fiction without purpose, even if it's a really tiresome tropey one, like having a female character gain strength from her trauma. Jordan, who shows throughout the series that he is squicked out by sexual assault, tends to have either villainous women experience it as a punishment, which is problematic and gross and uncomfortable, or male protagonists experience it in strange, tone-deaf role reversals, or else he explores it as a manifestation of purest evil by having Myrtle be sexual sadists. With the exception of Morghese, sexual assault is something he avoids putting his heroines through, and I don't think he'd have done that if he hadn't felt like the idea of Valda raping and murdering her was the only thing that would make Galad challenge and kill him. So while out of the context of the story, this is obviously sexual assault, I don't think that's the authorial intent, especially because it would be such a horrific mischaracterization of Egwene. I know there are people who believe Egwene would actually use the power of the world of dreams to commit a sexual assault against Nynaeve, but I don't understand how they see that in her character, and am honestly not interested in finding out. I have heard the theory that Egwene set random melty monsters on Nynaeve, and Nynaeve was the one who made them rapey, that her terror and her imagination in Tel Iran Riyadh morphed them into a manifestation of her actual fear. And while that is an excellent theory, especially since we've seen a couple of glimmers alluding to Nynaeve being afraid of sexual assault in earlier books, and it's far more believable than the notion that Egwene would make rapey monsters, I struggle to believe that was the authorial intent either because of the general nonchalance after Egwene disappears the monsters. It says, "The men, creatures, vanished, and her feet thudded to the floor. For a moment all she could do was shudder and weep. Hastily, she repaired the damage to her dress, but the scratches from long fingernails remained on her neck and chest. Clothing could be mended easily in Tel Iran Riyadh, but whatever happened to a human? Her knees shook so badly that it was all she could do to stay upright. She half expected Egwene to comfort her, and for once she would have accepted it gladly, but the other woman only said, 'There are worse things here, but nightmares are bad enough. I made these and unmade them, but even I have trouble with those I just find. And I did not try to hold them, Nynaeve. If you knew how to unmake them, you could have.' Nynaeve tossed her head angrily, refusing to scrub the tears from her cheeks. 'I could have dreamed myself away, to Shiriam's study or back to my bed.' She did not sound sulky. Of course she did not. 'If you had not been too scared spitless to think of it,' Egwene said dryly. 'Oh, take that sullen look off your face. It looks silly on you.' She glared at the other woman, but it did not work as it usually did. Instead of flaring into argument, Egwene merely arched an eyebrow at her. 'None of this looks like Swan Sanche,' Nynaeve said to change the subject. 'What had gotten into the girl?' 'It doesn't,' Egwene agreed, looking around the room. 'I see why I had to come by way of my old room in the novices' quarters, but I suppose people do decide to try something new sometimes.' 'That is what I mean,' Nynaeve told her patiently. She had not sounded sulky, and she had not looked sullen. It was ridiculous. 'The woman who furnished this room doesn't look at the world the same as the woman who chose what used to be here. Look at those paintings. I don't know what the triple thing is, but you can recognize the other as well as I.' They had both seen it happen. 'Bonwin, I should say,' Egwene said thoughtfully. 'You never did listen to the lectures as you should. It is a triptych. Whatever it is, it's the other that's important.' She had listened to the yellows well enough. The rest was a pack of useless nonsense, often as not. 'It seems to me that the woman who hung it wants to be reminded how dangerous Rand is. if Swan Sanche has turned against Rand for some reason. Egwene, this could be far worse than just her wanting Elaine back in the tower. Perhaps, Egwene said judiciously. Maybe the papers will tell us something. You search in here. When I finish with Lyanna's desk, I will help you. Nynaeve stared indignantly at Egwene's back as she left. You search in here, indeed. Egwene had no right to give her orders. She had to march right after her and tell her so in no uncertain terms. Then why are you standing here like a lump? She asked herself angrily. Searching the papers was a good idea, and she might as well do so in here as out there. In fact, the Amerlin's desk was more likely to hold something important. Grumbling to herself about what she would do to set Egwene straight, she stalked to the thickly carved table, kicking her skirts with every step. So Nynaeve is obviously upset and fucked up by what Egwene did, but there is no reflection on the rapiness of it, here or later, which, if you're gonna use sexual assault in a scene, if that was Jordan's intent, you'd think there'd be some reference to it, because he's not a writer who uses rape gratuitously. And if a writer doesn't use it gratuitously, then there has to be a point when he does use it. And for it to have a point, it has to be referred to. So I have to wonder, is this a manifestation of what RJ considers a necessary lesson? Similar to the necessary lesson that Amis teaches Egwene in Book 4, when Egwene thinks that she's woken up from her unauthorized trip into the world of dreams because she's been pulled out of the heart of the stone, where she's exchanging news with Elaine and sits up and is inside her tent, or so she thinks, and then Amis morphs into a monster to eat her face. And taken at face value, what Amis did as a necessary lesson to show Egwene the dangers of Teleron-Riyadh is super fucked up. But within the context of the story, it's as shoulder-shruggy and commonplace as spanking. There's just a lot of it, and it's kind of like, meh. And so judging characters who do that kind of shit the same way we judge people in the real world who might behave the same way isn't reasonable. Because while it isn't great to have a necessary lesson where one character gives another a horrifying hands-on demonstration of how truly fucking dangerous this place is, as far as life in Randland goes, it's nothing to write home about. It's just a practical lesson in danger, sort of like using live ammo on the obstacle course when you're finishing up your basic training. But Egwene doesn't get to walk away from this meeting with a strict teacher doing something for her pupil's own good award, because Egwene isn't doing this for Nynaeve's own good. She's doing this to divert Nynaeve's attention from the fact that she does not have the Wise One's permission to be in the world of dreams by herself. And the exploration of Egwene's shady reasoning and everything else that's going on with her in this scene will be saved for Egwene's next character study episode, which I don't think I'm going to do until Lord of Chaos. I'm wavering back and forth about whether I want to do the exploration of Egwene through this book, and I don't think I'm going to. But at some point I will look at this from Egwene's perspective, and I won't be making any excuses for what she's doing, because it's not okay, not even in the context of the story. If Amis doing her monstery thing to Egwene to teach her a lesson about the dangers of Teleron-Riyadh is a Randland version of okay, that does not mean that what Egwene does here is okay. They are not the same thing, even taking as a given that sexual assault was not the authorial intent. Egwene chooses to do this because she believes that Nynaeve, should she find out she doesn't have the Wise One's permission to be in Teleron-Riyadh, might choose to turn her in for her own good, which is possible. Nynaeve does feel entitled to decide what's for Egwene's own good. Anyway, they decide to search both Elida's desk and Alviarin's, and so as Nynaeve is reading about the gathering of Blue Sisters, Egwene sees the arrest warrant, signed by Elida as Amerlin, that says all loyal sisters should report the presence of the woman Moraine Damodred. And it says, "Loyal sisters. Egwene, that fits with the Mikura woman's message. Whatever happened to Swan, the Ajas have split over Elida as Amerlin. It must be." "Yes, of course. Very good, Nynaeve. I did not see that." Her smile was so pleased that Nynaeve smiled back. "There's a report on the Amerlin's writing table about a gathering of Blues. I was just reading it when you shouted. I'll wager the Blues didn't support Elida. The Blue and Red Ajas had a sort of armed truce at the best of times and came near going for each other's throats at the worst. But when they went back into the inner room, the report was not to be found. There were plenty of documents. Jolene's letter had reappeared. A brief reading made Egwene's eyebrows climb nearly to her hair, but not the one that they wanted. "Can you remember what it said?" Egwene asked. "I had just gotten a few lines when you shouted, and I just can't remember." "Try, Nynaeve. Try very hard." "I am, Egwene, but it will not come. I am trying." What she was doing hit Nynaeve like a sudden hammer between the eyes. Excusing herself, to Egwene, a girl whose bottom she had switched for throwing a tantrum not more than 2 years ago, and a moment earlier she had been proud as a hen with a new egg because Egwene was pleased with her. She remembered quite clearly the day when the balance between them had shifted, when they ceased being the wisdom and the girl who fetched when the wisdom said fetch, becoming instead just two women far from home. It seemed that balance had shifted further, and she did not like it. She was going to have to do something to move it back where it belonged. The lie. She had deliberately lied to Egwene for the first time ever today. That was why her moral authority had vanished, why she was floundering around, unable to assert herself properly. I drank the tea, Egwene. She forced each word deliberately. She had to force them. The Makura woman's fork-root tea. She and Lucy hauled us upstairs like sacks of feathers. That is about how much strength we had between us. If Tom and Julian hadn't come to pull us out by the scruffs of our necks, we would probably be there still, or else on our way to the tower so full of fork-root we wouldn't wake up until we got here. Taking a deep breath, she tried for a tone of righteous firmness, but it was difficult when you had just confessed to having been an utter fool. What came out sounded much more tentative than she liked. If you tell the wise ones about this, especially that Mullane, I'll box your ears. Something in that should have sparked Egwene's ire. It seemed odd to want to start a row. Usually their quarrels were over Egwene refusing to see reason, and they seldom ended pleasantly, since the girl had formed the habit of continuing to refuse, but that was certainly better than this. Yet Egwene only smiled at her, an amused smile, a condescending amused smile. I more than suspected as much, Nynaeve. You used to drone on about herbs night and day, but you never mentioned any plant called fork-root. I was sure you'd never heard of it until that woman mentioned it. You've always tried to put the best face on things. If you fell headfirst into a pigsty, you try to convince everyone you did it on purpose. Now, what we have to decide— I do no such thing, Nynaeve spluttered. You certainly do. Facts are facts. You might as well stop whining about it and help me decide— Whining? This was not going at all the way she wanted. They are no such thing. Not facts, I mean. I have never done what you said. For a moment, Egwene stared at her silently. You will not let go of this, will you? Very well. You lied to me. It was not a lie, she muttered. Not exactly. The other woman ignored her interruption. And you lie to yourself. Do you remember what you made me drink the last time I lied to you? Suddenly a cup was in her hand, full of viscous, sickly green liquid. It looked as if it had been scooped from a scummy, stagnant pond. The only time I ever lied to you. The memory of that taste was an effective discouragement. If you cannot tell the truth, even to yourself— Nynaeve took a step back before she could stop herself. Boiled cat fern and powdered maven's leaf. Her tongue writhed at just the thought. I did not really lie, actually. Why was she making excuses? I just didn't tell the whole truth. I am the wisdom. I was the wisdom. That ought to count for something still. You cannot really think— Just tell her. You're not the child here, and you certainly are not going to drink— Egwene, Egwene pushed the cup nearly under her nose. She could smell the acrid tang. All right, she said hastily. This can't be happening. But she could not take her eyes off that brimming cup, and she could not stop the words tumbling out. Sometimes I try to make things look better for myself than they were. Sometimes. But never anything important. I've never lied about anything important. Never, I swear. Only small things. The cup vanished, and Nynaeve heaved a sigh of relief. Fool, woman. She couldn't have made you drink it. What is wrong with you? What we have to decide, Egwene said as if nothing at all had happened, is who to tell. Nynaeve reflects upon this scene in the White Tower, which is one of the most impactful ones for her character in this book, regularly throughout the Fires of Heaven, but it's never about the attack, which you would think would be the central thing. She's always thinking about the boiled cat fern and powdered maven's leaf and the loss of her moral high ground. Whenever she lies to herself, there's this faint flavor of boiled cat fern and powdered maven's leaf, and RJ uses that device to force her to be a little bit more honest with herself, and a little bit more honest with other people, and a little bit more self-aware. And so it seems like the authorial intent of this scene, at least for Nynaeve's character, is to force her to self-reflect a bit and to grow up. And I've said in previous episodes that it's a very poorly written scene, but I don't think that that's totally true. It's just that RJ didn't notice the elephant in the room. But neither did I when I first read it in the mid-90s. In fact, not the first few times that I read it. It took me a long time to become cognizant of what is actually going on in that scene if you step back and take it at face value. And that just lets you know how pervasive that rape culture really is. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it's not a thing. But the conflict with Egwene leaves Nynaeve feeling very wrong-footed, which gives her more fuel for her rage fire, and it makes her come across as more combative with the others. She has lost any moral high ground with Egwene, and so she's being shitty and dickish to everybody else, and she's constantly thinking and muttering in her inner narrative and getting a sense of boiled catfern and powdered maven's leaf. And the frustration and inner conflict it's causing starts to make her super antagonistic. And this antagonism becomes an issue in the circus. She gets into a couple of different physical altercations with other performers. You hear about the first fight in chapter 24. Elaine is talking to Egwene and the Wise Ones in the Heart of the Stone, and she says, "Oh, Egwene, you would not have believed it. All 4 of the Shyvanas had come to have supper with us, to flirt with Nynaeve, really. Or trying to, because she paid them no more mind than buzzing flies, when Littell stalked up and began hitting Nynaeve with a stick, calling her all sorts of terrible names. Was she hurt? Egwene was not sure which of them she meant. If Nynaeve's temper was roused. Not her. The Shyvanas tried to pull her off Littell, and Tarek will likely limp for days, not to mention Brug's swollen lip. Petra had to carry Littell to her wagon, and I doubt she'll put her nose out for some time." Elaine shook her head. "Luca did not know who to blame. One of his acrobats lamed and his bear trainer weeping on her bed, so he blamed everybody, and I thought Nynaeve was going to box his ears as well. At least she did not channel. I thought she was going to once or twice until she had Littell down on the ground." And then we hear a little bit more about this fight in the next chapter after Elaine and Egwene meet up in the White Tower away from the Wise One's prying eyes. Egwene says to Elaine, "Are you certain this fight will not cause more trouble? A feud with this Littell could not make their traveling easier." "I do not think so. Littell's grievance against Nynaeve was that all the unattached men were no longer hers to pick and choose from. Some women do think that way, I suppose. Eludra keeps to herself, and Sarandon wouldn't have said boo to a goose until I started teaching her to stand up for herself, and Clarine is married to Petra, but Nynaeve has made it clear that she'll box the ears of any man who even thinks he can flirt with her, and she apologized to Littell, so I hope that may settle it." "She apologized?" The other woman nodded, her face as bemused as Egwene knew her own must be. "I thought she would thump Luca when he told her she must. He doesn't seem to think her injunction holds to him, by the way. But she did it after grumping about for an hour. Muttering about you, actually." She hesitated, giving Egwene a sidelong look. "Did you say something to her at your last meeting? She's been different since then, and sometimes she talks to herself. Argues, really. About you, from the little I've heard." So, this is really stupid. From reading Am I the Asshole, it seems like there are actual human people sometimes that actually behave this way, but reading about them in fiction is exceptionally boring. What a dull and absurd point of conflict, to have a woman be so upset that there are other pretty women coming to the menagerie to apparently make it so that other men would be interested in them. It's just ridiculous, and it comes across as even worse because when we see the menagerie again in Book 9, Littell and Luca have gotten married. So she has this thing for Luca, and he literally only marries her after the woman that he actually wanted, Nynaeve, tells him no thank you at the end of this book. Ugh. Regardless, Nynaeve does not pick this first fight with the woman that Luca settles for, but she does pick the second fight. The first chapter that we are back in her head, after they join the menagerie, is chapter 33, which is called A Question of Crimson. We learn here that Luca has talked her into letting Tom throw knives at her. When the crew first joins the circus, he tells them, "You guys need to perform. It's not enough that you're going to pay our expenses all the way to Geldon. You have to fit in." And Tom's like, "Hey, I can juggle. I can perform with knives." And Elaine's like, "Hey, I can do the high walk thing with a little help from the One Power, and Julin will help me." And Nynaeve's like, "Fuck you, I dole out the money." So Luca has finally finessed her into performing by being like, "Oh, you could just let Tom throw some knives at you just for practice." And he has this red dress that he wants her to wear, particularly because Jordan always kind of alludes that Nynaeve has huge tits, so I think the whole point of this low-cut dress is that tits obviously will draw people, especially on a beautiful woman, and so he's constantly pushing to get her to wear the red dress, and in the end she only wears it out of guilt because she feels obligated to do whatever Brigida wants, and Brigida is like, "Hell yeah, I want to flash my tits in this awesome, awesome dress." Anyway. During the knife-throwing scene, there's a mention that she has a puffy eye, and Luca's pushing about the dress, and then she's pissed because the sun's going down, and she's like, "Don't ever throw knives at me unless the light is perfect." And then she leaves, and it says, It was not until she stalked away, swishing her skirts angrily, that she realized that she had agreed to actually do this fool thing, by implication at least. They would try to hold her to it as surely as the sun would set tonight. Fool, fool, fool woman! The clearing where they, or Tom at least, him and Luca both, had been practicing, stood some little distance from the camp, over beside the road north. Doubtless Luca had not wanted to upset the animals should Tom put one of his knives through her heart. The man would likely have fed her corpse to the lions. The only reason he wanted her to wear that dress was so he could ogle what she had no intention of showing to anyone but Lon, and burn him too for a stubborn fool man. She wished she had him there so she could tell him so. She wished she had him there so she could be sure he was safe. She broke a dead dog fennel and used its feathery brown length like a whip to snap the heads off weeds that poked through the leaves on the ground. So she has this raging inner monologue as she's walking her way back to the tent, just angry about all kinds of stuff. She's wailing on the weeds with her stick, and then breaking it into little pieces after she's whipped it to bits and stomping along, and she finally gets up into the wagon, where Elaine is surreptitiously studying the Adam and quickly stuffs it under a blanket. And it says, Elaine exclaimed, "Your eye! What happened to you?" They needed to wash her hair in hen pepper again. Faint hints of gold were showing at the roots of those black tresses. It had to be done every few days. "Sarandon hit me when I wasn't looking," Nynaeve muttered. The remembered taste of boiled cat fern and powdered maven's leaf made her tongue curl. That was not why she had let Elaine go to the last meeting in Tel Iran Riyadh 2. She was not avoiding Egwene. It was just that she made most of the journeys into the world of dreams between meetings, and it was only fair to give Elaine her chances to go. That was it. And a bit further it says, she did not know why she was hiding the truth. Elaine had obviously not been outside the wagon, or she would know already. She and Julian were probably the only people in the camp who did not know, now that Tom had surely revealed every disgusting detail to Luca. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the other bed and made herself meet Elaine's eyes. Something in the quiet of the other woman said she knew that more was coming. "I asked Sarandon about Damani and Suldam. I'm certain she knows more than she lets on." She paused for Elaine to voice doubts that she had asked rather than demanded, to say that the Shanshan woman had already told them all that she knew, that she had not had much contact with Damani or Suldam, but Elaine kept silent, and Nynaeve realized that she was only hoping to postpone the moment with an argument. She got quite heated about not knowing any more, so I shook her. "You've really gone too far with her. She waggled her finger under my nose." Still, Elaine only watched her, those cool blue eyes barely blinking. It was all Nynaeve could do not to look away as she went on. "She threw me somehow over her shoulder. I got up and slapped her, and she knocked me down with her fist. That is how I got the eye." She might as well tell the rest. Elaine would hear soon enough. Better it came from her. She would rather have pulled out her own tongue. I wasn't about to put up with that, certainly. We scuffled a little more. Not much of a scuffle on her part, for all that she had refused to quit. The bitterest truth was that Sarandon had only stopped flipping her about and tripping her in sneaky ways, because it had been like manhandling a child. Nynaeve had had as much chance as that child. If only no one had been watching, so she could have channeled. She had certainly been angry enough. If only no one had been watching, period. She wished Sarandon had pounded her with her fists until she bled. Then Littell gave her a stick. You know how that woman wants to get back at me. There was certainly no need to say that Sarandon had been holding her head down over a wagon tongue at the time. No one had manhandled her like that since she threw a pitcher of water at Nasai Yellen when she was 16. So Nynaeve tries to bully the Shanshan elephant trainer, and she pays for it. And RJ doesn't give us any introspection on Nynaeve's part to show why she felt the need to push Sarandon for more information. Wanting to know more about Suldam and Damani is a pretty flimsy excuse for character motivation. So looking at authorial intent, RJ is definitely highlighting the impulsive choices made by someone feeling desperate and trapped. Nynaeve doesn't like feeling powerless, so she's like, I need to do something. It's useful to know this information, and she's got to know more. So she just goes to Sarandon and basically starts picking this fight. And hey, here's another thing to be mad about. She gets her ass kicked. Sarandon's an animal trainer, so she's not exactly a soldier, but she's sort of ancillary to a soldier because the elephants are used in a military capacity, and she's therefore trained in certain martial abilities. So she's using either Aikido or Judo, something like that, to help Nynaeve fall a whole bunch. I almost feel like RJ uses this scene to show Nynaeve's growth. She behaved badly, and while she doesn't totally acknowledge I have no one but myself to blame, she's forcing herself to tell Elaine the whole story and owning some faults. And she realizes that she wants Elaine to doubt her word so that she can lash out and fight rather than tell the truth. She actually mentally acknowledges to herself that she's trying to pick a fight because she'd rather argue and make it be Elaine's fault. And she actually admits that to herself. That night, Nynaeve goes into Tel Riyadh. She is avoiding Egwene like the plague while insisting she's doing nothing of the sort, and so she's taking the time to go into the world of dreams as much as possible otherwise, so she has a reasonable excuse to be like, well, you might as well go to the meetings, Elaine, because I'm going all the other times, because I'm thinking of all of these questions to ask Birgitte. And that night, Birgitte has found Moghedien, and she takes Nynaeve to spy on her, spying on Ravin, Lanfear, Samael, and Grendel, as they discuss their plan to lure Rand into attacking Samael. So they're staring down at Moghedien, who is staring down at her 4 frenemies, all floating in dark space, listening to Samael saying, I don't like this plan, and the rest of them telling him, well, you agreed to it. And it says, Nynaeve gave a start as Birgitte touched her arm, and they were back among the wagons with the moon shining through the clouds. It seemed almost normal compared to where they had been. Why, Nynaeve began, and had to swallow. Why did you bring us away? Her heart leaped into her throat. Did Moghedien see us? She had been so intent on the other Forsaken, on the mingled strangeness and commonplaceness of them, that she had forgotten to keep an eye on Moghedien. She heaved a fervent sigh when Birgitte shook her head. I never took my gaze from her for more than a moment, and she never moved a muscle. But I do not like being so exposed. If she had looked up, or one of the others— Nynaeve wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and still shivered. Ravin and Samael. She wished she did not sound hoarse. Did you recognize the others? Of course Birgitte had. It was a foolish way to phrase it, but she was shaken. Lanfear was the one hidden by her chair. The other was Grendel. Do not think her a fool because she lolls in a chair that would make a Senji no-room keeper blush. She is devious, and she uses her pets and rights to cause the roughest soldier I ever knew to swear celibacy. Grendel is devious, Moghedien's voice said, but not devious enough. Birgitte whirled, silver bow coming up, silver arrow almost flying to knock, and abruptly hurtled 30 paces through the moonlight to crash against Nynaeve's wagon, so hard that she bounced back 5 and lay in a crumpled heap. Desperately, Nynaeve reached for Saidar. Fear streaked through her anger, but there was anger enough, and it ran into an invisible wall between her and the warm glow of the true source. She almost howled. Something seized her feet, jerking them backward and up off the ground. Her hands flew up and back until wrists met ankles above her head. Her clothes became powder that slid from her skin, and her braid dragged her head back until the braid rested on her bottom. Frantic, she tried to step out of the dream. Nothing happened. She hung doubled in midair like some netted creature, every muscle strained to its limit. Tremors ran through her. Her fingers twitched feebly, brushing her feet. She thought if she tried to move anything else, her back would break. Strangely, her fear was gone now that it was too late. She was certain that she could have been quick enough, if not for the terror that had laced through her when she needed to act. All she wanted was a chance to put her hands around Moghedien's throat. Much good that does now. Every breath came in strained panting. Moghedien moved to where Nynaeve could see her, between the quivering triangle of her arms. The glow of Saidar surrounded the woman mockingly. A detail from Grendel's chair, the Forsaken said. Her dress was mist like Grendel's, sliding from black fog to nearly transparent and back to gleaming silver. The fabric changed almost constantly. Nynaeve had seen her wear it before in Tanchico. Not something I would have thought of on my own, but Grendel can be edifying. Nynaeve glared at her, but Moghedien did not appear to notice. I can hardly believe that you actually came hunting me. Did you really believe that because once you were lucky enough to catch me off guard, you might be my equal? The woman's laugh was cutting. If you only knew the effort I've put into finding you, and you came to me. She glanced around at the wagons, studying the lions and bears for a moment before turning back to Nynaeve. A menagerie? That would make you easy enough to find, if I needed to now. Do your worst, burn you! Nynaeve snarled. As best she could, doubled up as she was, she had to force the words out one by one. She did not dare look straight toward Birgitte. Not that she could have shifted her head enough to, but rolling her eyes as if caught between fury and fear, she caught a glimpse. Her stomach went hollow, even stretched tight as a sheepskin for drying. Birgitte lay sprawled on the ground, silver arrows spilling from the quiver at her waist, her silver bow a span from her unmoving hand. Lucky, you say? If you hadn't managed to sneak up on me, I'd have striped you till you wailed. I'd have wrung your neck like a chicken. She had only one chance if Birgitte was dead, and a bleak one, to make Moghedien so angry she killed her quickly in a rage. If only there was some way to warn Elaine. Her dying would have to do it. So all along, Nynaeve has puffed herself up to a certain extent by thinking about how she has managed to defeat Moghedien. But she is not stupid. She has tried to use her confidence and knowledge that she can do it to aid the belief in herself. She knows that Moghedien is dangerous and that fighting in Tel Riyadh is not ideal. She is not going into it like, fuck yeah, I'm going to kick some ass. She's very aware of the danger and sensitive to it. But she also feels like she didn't really have any other choice, which is a fair point, because what else are you supposed to do? You know you can beat this person. You know that they're going to look for you. So are you just supposed to wait, or are you supposed to try? It really seems like Nynaeve didn't have any good options here. She made use of someone who had unique skills in Brigida, someone who wanted to help, and she did her best, and she tried, and I feel like that's all you can ask of someone. But things go sideways, and she probably would have pretty quickly dusted herself off emotionally despite the trauma of this admittedly terrifying situation if Nynaeve had not gotten someone else hurt. She hates pain and suffering. She is a healer. She doesn't want to fight. She'll punch a motherfucker in the face if the occasion calls, but she's not interested in engaging in combat. Yeah, she's angry, and she will if she gotta, but that's not where her heart is at. She wants pain and suffering and war and explosions and everything else to be unnecessary. It's one of the reasons why she's so upset as they're getting out of Samara. She doesn't dare channel for fear of alerting Moghedien, but if she could make all the swords unnecessary. She could freeze all of the crazy fanatics in the streets with air and just saunter to the docks, and not being able to is emotionally wrenching. Getting someone else hurt destroys Nynaeve's confidence. After Elaine bonds Brigida, she asks Nynaeve what happened. And it says, for a long moment she thought the other woman was going to start crying again as her chin quivered and her lips worked. When she began to speaking, her voice was iron, her face a blend of fury and too many tears ever to be shed. She told the tale starkly, almost sketchily, until she came to Moghedien's appearance among the wagons. That she rendered in painful detail. I should be welted from the neck down, she said bitterly at last, touching a smooth, unmarked arm. Unmarked or not, she flinched. I don't understand why I am not. I feel it. But I deserve the welts for stupid, foolish pride. For being too afraid to do what I should. I deserve being hung up like a ham in a smokehouse. If there was any justice, I would still be dangling there, and Brigida would not be lying on that bed with us wondering whether she'll live or not. If only I knew more. If only I could have Moghedien's knowledge for 5 minutes, I could heal her. I am sure of it. If you were still hanging, Elaine said practically, in a very short while you would be waking up and shielding me. I don't doubt Moghedien would have seen to it that you were angry enough to channel. She knows us all too well, remember? And I do doubt very much that I would have suspected anything until you had done it. I do not fancy being carted off to Moghedien, and I cannot believe you do either. The other woman did not look at her. It must have been a link, Nynaeve, like an Adam. That is how she made you feel pain without marking you. Nynaeve still sat there in a glowering sulk. Nynaeve, Brigida is alive. You did everything you could for her, and the light willing she will live. It was Moghedien who did this to her, not you. A soldier who takes blame for comrades who fall in battle is a fool. You and I are soldiers in a battle, but you are not a fool, so stop behaving like one. Nynaeve did look at her then, a scowl that lasted only a moment before she turned her face completely away. You don't understand. Her voice sank almost to a whisper. She was one of the heroes bound to the wheel of time, destined to be born again and again to make legends. She wasn't born this time, Elaine. She was ripped out of Tel Riyadh as she stood. Is she still bound to the wheel? Or has she been ripped away from that too? Ripped away from what her own courage earned her because I was so proud, so man-stubborn stupid that I made her hunt for Moghedien. Elaine had hoped that those questions had not occurred to Nynaeve yet, would not until she had had a little time to recover first. And this grief and self-pity and sense of responsibility for something that is potentially a really fucking terrible consequence becomes a point of contention between Nynaeve and Brigida, who does not appreciate Nynaeve trying to take responsibility for her choices. And for whatever reason, RJ plays with that conflict using the red dress that Nynaeve hates so much because Brigida loves it and sex sells. 2 busty women in matching low-cut dresses with arrows instead of knives is an awesome act, and RJ plays up Nynaeve's misery for comic effect, and it's a lot of fun. And while Nynaeve is afraid of Moghedien finding them, it's almost more her hatred of the dress and terror of having arrows shot at her that leads her to impulsively seek help from the Prophet. She's sort of like, maybe he could find a ship today, and then I wouldn't have to have arrows shot at me, and I wouldn't have to wear this fucking dress. Wraps shawl tightly around herself. Nynaeve comes across Uno as he's watching Elaine do her high-walking act. And so she kind of follows him around the menagerie and manages to get his attention. And he tries to drag her away because just the fact that she knows Rand and comes from his village means that she's in danger from crazy fucking people. He tells her this town is full of lunatic assholes who will literally tear you to shreds because they will be filled with worshipful wonder at the fact that you know the Lord Dragon. You're in danger. So he immediately offers to help get her out of there. And then he tells her, Masema will probably help you out. He'll get you a ship. He'll probably have a ship fucking built. And so he takes her into the city. RJ shows us the Prophet for the first time through the point of view of one of his most incautious characters. We get a glimmer of the Prophet through Perrin's eyes in Book 3, where Masema clings to Perrin's arm as they're standing in the middle of the stream in their camp in the Mountains of Mist, asking him, why did the Lord Dragon leave us? What sin did we commit? But Perrin is a cautious and wary person. Nynaeve is most definitely not. Perrin humored Masema. Nynaeve is not the sort to humor anyone. She expects the world to bend to her, and that she should not have to hold back or be smaller as she moves through it. It was enough of a struggle for her to join the White Tower and engage in the required neck-bending to get the training that she wants. But for Nynaeve to hedge herself in, to interact with a man? Even though Uno and Regan warn her, they're like, don't mention that you're from Tarvalin, don't mention any of that, and just kind of, watch your tongue, stay calm, hold your temper, and smile and nod, and you might get what you want. So Masema greets his bros, and it's like, hey, good to see you, have you come to the light at last? And it says, we walk in the light, Regan said carefully, as always. Uno kept silent, his face blank. Weary patience made an odd play on Masema's sour features. There is no way to the light save through the Lord Dragon. You will see the way and the truth in the end, for you have seen the Lord Dragon, and only those whose souls are swallowed in the shadow can see and not believe. You are not such. You will believe. In spite of the heat and the wool shawl, goosebumps crawled along Nynaeve's arms. Total conviction filled the man's voice, and this close she could see a glint in his nearly black eyes that bordered on madness. He swept those eyes over her, and she stiffened her knees. He made the most rabid white cloaks she had ever seen appear mile. Those fellows in the alley were only a pale imitation of their master. You, woman, are you ready to come to the light of the Lord Dragon, abandoning sin and flesh? I walk in the light as best I can. She was irritated to find herself speaking as carefully as Regan. Sin? Who did he think he was? You are too concerned with the flesh. Masema's gaze was withering as it swept over her red dress and the shawl wrapped tightly around her. And what do you mean by that? Uno's eye widened in startlement, and Regan made small shushing motions, yet she could as soon have flown as stopped. Do you think you have the right to tell me how to dress? Before she quite realized what she was doing, she had untied the shawl and looped it over her elbows. It really was much too hot anyway. No man has that right, for me or any other woman. If I chose to go naked, it would be none of your concern. Masema contemplated her bosom for a moment. Not so much as a hint of admiration lit his deep eyes, only acid contempt, then raised that stare to her face. Uno's real eye and painted made a perfect match, scowling at nothing, and Regan winced, surely muttering to himself inside his head. Nynaeve swallowed hard. So much for guarding her tongue. For perhaps the first time in her life she truly regretted speaking her mind without thinking first. If this man could order men's hands cut off, order men hanged with only a jackful excuse of a trial, what was he not capable of? She thought she was angry enough to channel. But if she did, if Moghedien or any Black Sisters were in Samara... But if I don't... She wanted very much to wrap the shawl back around her, up to her chin, but not with him staring at her. Something in the back of her mind shouted at her not to be a complete woolhead. Only men let pride overcome sense, but she met Masema's gaze defiantly, even if she did have to stop herself from swallowing again. His lip curled. Such garments are worn to entice men, and for no other reason. She could not understand how his voice could be so fervent and so icy at the same time. Thoughts of the flesh distract the mind from the Lord Dragon and the light. I have considered banning dresses that distract men's eyes and minds. Let women who would waste time in attracting men and men who would attract women be scourged, until they know that only in perfect contemplation of the Lord Dragon and the light can joy be found. He was not really looking at her any longer. That dark burning stare looked through her to something distant, Let taverns and places that sell strong drink and all places that would take the minds of people from that perfect contemplation be closed and burned to the ground. I frequented such places in my days of sin, but now I heartily regret, as all should regret their transgressions. There is only the Lord Dragon and the light. All else is illusion, a snare set by the shadow. This is Nynaeve, Almira, Uno said quickly into the first pause for breath, from Emond's field and the 2 rivers whence the Lord Dragon comes. Massima's head turned slowly to the one-eyed man, and she hastily took the opportunity to redo the shawl as she had it. She was at Faldara with the Lord Dragon, and at Falma. The Lord Dragon rescued her at Falma. The Lord Dragon cares for her as for a mother. Another time she would have given him a few choice words and maybe a well-boxed ear. Rand had not rescued her, or not exactly anyway, and she was only a handful of years older than he. A mother indeed. Massima turned back to her. The zealous light that had burned in his eyes before was nothing to what was there now. They almost glowed. Nynaeve. Yes. His voice quickened. Yes, I remember your name and your face. Blessed are you among women, Nynaeve Almira. None more so save the blessed mother of the Lord Dragon herself, for you watched the Lord Dragon grow. You attended the Lord Dragon as a child. He seized her arms, hard fingers biting in painfully, but he seemed unaware of it. You will speak to the crowds of the Lord Dragon's boyhood, of his first words of wisdom, of the miracles that accompanied him. The light has sent you here to serve the Lord Dragon. She was not exactly sure what to say. There had never been any miracles around Rand that she had seen. She had heard of things in Tyr, but you could hardly call what a Taviran caused miracles. Not really. Even what had occurred at Falma had a rational explanation, sort of. And as for words of wisdom, the first she had heard out of him had been a fervent promise never to throw a rock at anyone again, offered after she had paddled his young backside for it. She did not believe she had heard another word since that she could call wise. In any case, if Rand had given sage advice from his cradle, if there had been comets by night and apparitions in the sky by day, she still would not have stayed with this madman. I must travel downriver, she said guardedly, to join him, the Lord Dragon. That name curdled on her tongue so soon after her promise to herself, but Rand was apparently never anything as simple as he around the prophet. I'm just being sensible. That's all it is. A man is an oak, a woman a willow, the saying ran. The oak fought the wind and was broken, while the willow bent when it must and survived. That did not mean she had a like bending. He, the Lord Dragon, is in Tyr. The Lord Dragon has summoned me there. Tyr. Massima took his hands away, and she surreptitiously rubbed her arms. She did not have to try hiding it, though. He was staring at something beyond sight again. Yes, I have heard. Speaking to something beyond sight, too, or to himself. When Amadisi has come to the Lord Dragon, as Geldon has, I will lead the people to Tyr to bask in the radiance of the Lord Dragon. I will send disciples to spread the word of the Lord Dragon throughout Terabon and Aradoman, to Saldaea and Kandor and the borderlands, to Andor, and I will lead the people to kneel at the Lord Dragon's feet. A wise plan, O prophet of the Lord Dragon. A fool plan, if she had ever heard one. That was not to say it would not work. Fool plans often did for some reason when men made them. Rand might even enjoy having all those people kneel to him if he was half as arrogant as Egwene claimed. But I cannot wait. I have been summoned, and when the Lord Dragon summons, mere mortals must obey. Someday she was going to get a chance to box Rand's head for her need to do this. I have to find a boat going downriver. Massima stared at her for so long that she began to grow nervous. Sweat trickled down her back and between her breasts, and it was only partly the heat. That stare would have made Moghedien sweat. Finally he nodded, fiery zealotry fading to leave only his usual dour scowl. Yes, he sighed. If you have been summoned, you must go. Go with the light and in the light. Dress more appropriately. Those who have been close to the Lord Dragon must be virtuous above all others, and meditate on the Lord Dragon and his light. A riverboat, Nynaeve insisted. You must know whenever a boat reaches Samara or any village along the river. If you could just tell me where I might find one, it would make my journey much swifter. She had been going to say easier, but she did not think ease mattered much to Massima. I do not concern myself with such things, he said testily. But you are right. When the Lord Dragon commands, you must come on the hour. I will ask. If a vessel can be found, someone will tell me of it eventually. His eyes shifted to the other 2 men. You must see that she is safe until then. If she persists in clothing herself in this matter, she will attract men with vile thoughts. She must be protected like a wayward child until she is reunited with the Lord Dragon. Nynaeve bit her tongue. A willow, not an oak, when a willow was needed. She managed to mask her irritation behind a smile that had to carry all the gratitude the idiot man could wish. A dangerous idiot, however. She had to remember that. It's really, really good for Nynaeve to have this refresher course, shortly before returning to Aes Sedai custody, that you need to watch your mouth sometimes, and suck it up, let things slide, and pick your battles. Being able to pick your battles is a very important skill, and it's one that Nynaeve struggles to learn. Just as Nynaeve's starting to get over what happened with Birgitte, which is less from processing guilt and more from Birgitte aggravating her out of her self-flagellation, she makes another choice in Samara that gets people hurt. She and Regan and Uno are walking back to the menagerie after meeting with Masema, and Galad starts following them. And she has her confrontation with Galad that I examined last episode, where he's like, let me help you to safety, let me get you a ship. And so she sends both Galad and Masema looking for a ship. And while Galad was not wrong when Elaine tells him, you've done enough, you fucking started a war, and he makes the comment, I gave Nynaeve my word, and the Children of the Light would have had to fight this prophet's people eventually. He's not wrong that they would have fought eventually, but it doesn't absolve Nynaeve of not thinking things through, and it doesn't absolve Galad of lack of nuance either. Nynaeve and the Shinerans leave Galad and finish walking back to the menagerie, and she ends up taking the wrong turn twice, but the Shinerans don't say anything, and it's a good thing. It says, she had had enough of holding her tongue. First Masema and then Galad. All she wanted was a wafer-thin excuse to tell someone exactly what she thought, especially that little voice in her head, pushed back to an insect buzz now, but refusing to be quiet. By the time they were out of Samara and on that dirt cart track with its sparse traffic, the voice refused to be denied. She worried over Rand's arrogance, but hers had brought herself and others as near calamity as made no never mind. For Birgitte, perhaps it was well over the line, even if she was alive. The best thing was for Nynaeve not to confront them again, not the Black Aja, and not Moghedien, not until someone who knew what they were doing could decide what should be done. Protest welled up, but she stamped on it as firmly as she ever had on Tom or Julian. She would go to Saladar and hand the matter over to the Blues. That was how it would be. She was set on it. Galad tells her, I had orders for Saladar, and she's like, ding, 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 Saladar! So she's just sort of like, I have fucked up way too much, so I need to let somebody else do this now because it's above my pay grade, and I'm a fuck-up, and I shouldn't be trusted with this anymore because people get hurt. After Moghedien, after all of the fuckery in Samara, because Galad and Masema together trying to get a boat equals kapow, she's only more convinced that anybody but her should be running this show. And she is able to pass off the responsibility because now she knows where the good ones are. Jordan devotes an incredibly long expository chapter to the women getting to Saladar. And I thought of it as totally purposeless when I was doing my reread. Good for nothing except showing that the women begin getting along again because they're faced with a genuine misogynist in this Captain Nynaeve who skippers the River Serpent, this ship that sails them away from Samara. But looking back over it while doing this episode, I can see that the purpose of this chapter, chapter 49, to Bowanda, is for Nynaeve to center herself and for RJ to have her get her groove back a bit. She's felt really pushed around and weighed down by circumstances, by everything that fell out with Moghedien, by the general pressure of everything and the overall sense of powerlessness that has been this entire book, and here Jordan puts her into a situation where she can take control again, starting right on the dock in Samara with the crowd of refugees that she insists Nynaeve will take. It says, there was little trouble getting the huddled crowd of men, women, and children aboard. Not once Nynaeve made it clear to Captain Nynaeve that he was going to find room for everyone, and whatever he thought he was going to charge, she knew exactly how much she would give for their fares to Bowanda. Of course, it might have helped a little that she'd taken the precaution of quietly telling Uno to have the Shinerans do something with their swords. 15 hard-faced, rough-drafts men, all with shaved heads and top-knots, not to mention bloodstains, oiling and sharpening blades, laughing as one recounted how another had almost been spitted like a lamb. Well, they had a most salutary effect. She counted the money into his hand, and if it pained her, she only had to summon the memory of those docks at Tanchico to keep counting. Nynaeve was right in one thing. Those folk did not look to have much coin. They would need whatever coppers they had. So she gets to put this snide fuckwad of a captain who told Galad, you paid me for these 2 wenches, you're going to expect me to take the other one and the soldiers for free? And Nynaeve gets in his face and tells him, you're not only going to take all of them, you're going to take every last fucking refugee on this dock, dickbag. And unlike Galad, who tells them, "I could only pay part of your passage just to Bowanda, the captain took every last bit of my money and I had to borrow besides," Nynaeve's willing to negotiate the cost. RJ makes it a point to talk about how the women are all getting along a whole lot better on the trip. Their hostility is beginning to ease, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there's no more waiting. And they're working toward a real goal again, and they're working together to help other people, and in the process, they're forcing and manipulating this asshole of a captain into doing something that he doesn't want to do. And a cooperative effort to win against shitheads always builds positive feeling. It says, "River Serpent was not a very large vessel, if wide, and counting everyone, there were well over 100 people aboard. A certain amount of space had to go to the crew working the sweeps and tending ropes and sails, and that did not leave much for the passengers. It did not help that the refugees kept as far from the Shinerans as possible. It seemed they had had their fill of armed men. There was scarcely room for everyone to sit, and none for lying down. Nynaeve approached Nera straight away. These folk need more room, especially the women and children. Since you have no more cabins, your hold will have to do." Nera's face darkened. Staring straight ahead, somewhere a pace to her left, he growled, "My hold is full of valuable cargo. Very valuable cargo." "I wonder if customs men are active along the Eldar here," Elaine said idly, eyeing the tree-lined banks to either side. The river was only a few hundred paces wide here, bordered with dried black mud and bare yellow clay. Geldon to one side and Amadisia to the other. It might seem odd your hold full of goods from the south and you heading south. Of course, you probably have all the documents showing where you've paid duties, and you could explain that you didn't unload because of the troubles in Samara. I've heard that excise men are quite understanding, really." The corners of his mouth turning down, he still did not look at either of them, which was why he had a very good view when Tom fanned empty hands, made a flourish, and was suddenly twirling a pair of knives through his fingers before making one of them disappear. "Just keeping in practice," Tom said, scratching one long mustache with the other blade. "I like to maintain certain skills." The gash in his white-haired scalp and the fresh blood on his face added to a blood-stained rent in one shoulder of his coat, and tears elsewhere besides, made him look villainous in any company but Uno's. The Shineran's toothy smile held no mirth at all, and did unfortunate things to his long scar and the new slash down his face, red and raw. The glaring crimson eye on his patch almost paled in comparison. Nera shut his eyes and drew a long, long breath. The hatches came open and crates and casks went splashing over the side, some heavy, most light and smelling of spices. Nera's winced every time the river closed over something else. He brightened if such a thing could be said of him when Nynaeve directed that bolts of silk and carpets and bales of fine woolens be left below, until he realized that she meant them for bedding. If his face had been sour before, now it could have curdled milk in the next room. Through the whole thing he never said a word. When women began drawing up buckets of water on ropes to wash their children right there on the deck, he strode to the stern, hands clenched behind his back, and stared at the few floating casks as they fell behind. In a way, it was Neris's peculiar attitude toward women that began smoothing the edges from Elaine's acid tongue and Brigida's. That was the way Nynaeve saw it. She herself had maintained her usual even disposition, of course. And maybe she's being a bit facetious here, like making fun of her own disposition. I can't really tell, because part of the growth that RJ has her go through over the course of the book is to acknowledge her own shitty disposition. But the night that Brigida is ripped away, Luca comes to dinner and engages in what amounts to sexual harassment of Nynaeve, following her on his stool around the fire as she keeps shifting to get away from him, murmuring in her ear and being a creep. And RJ plays it off as a comical scene, and the tone is comical, but it's not funny. But RJ, a man who meant women no harm, and whose character Luca is a man who means no harm and would never hurt a woman, makes it so there's no harm here. And that is so untrue to reality, because a woman never knows whether or not you mean harm. Men harm women all the time, and that's why people say yes, all men. It's not because women don't acknowledge that there are good men out there. Obviously, there are good men who would never hurt women. It's just that they can't know whether you're one of those men, at least not until she's known you for a while, and depending upon the woman's experience and the man in question, possibly not even then. That's why women do things like technically consent to sex that they don't want to have, because they weigh a situation and think, if I say no, I want to stop, will he? Do I risk it? I can not say no, and just feel gross and uncomfortable and vaguely violated by the whole thing, or I can roll the dice, say no, and risk being traumatized, hurt, or even killed. A lot of men don't like being told no, and a lot of women get assaulted or even killed for saying it, and a woman can never know if you're a man like that. And that's why you should ask and wait for yes every step of the way, and why no matter what movies tell you, persistence is not cute. But Jordan, who died before the Me Too movement, and who shows through the characters he writes that he was the type of man who would be fucked up and horrified to know that a big dude like him might have at one point had a sex partner who slept with him not because she wanted him, but because she was afraid of him, writes this dinner scene with a comical tone, with Lucas scooting his stool around the fire after Nynaeve. And after dinner's over, it says, "It was so pleasant of you to join us," Nynaeve said and stood up. Lucas stood when she did, a hopeful look in his eye along with the shine of the firelight. She set her plate atop the one in his hand. "Tom and Julian will be grateful for your help with the dishes, I am sure." Before his mouth finished falling open, she turned to Elaine. "It is late, and I expect we'll be moving across the river early." "Of course," Elaine murmured with just a hint of a smile, and she put her plate atop Nynaeve's before following her into the wagon. Nynaeve wanted to hug her, until she said, "Really, you should not encourage him." Lamps melted and wall brackets sprang alight. Nynaeve planted her fists on her hips. "Encourage him? The only way I could encourage him less would be to stab him." Sniffing for emphasis, she frowned at the lamps. "Next time use one of Eludra's fire sticks. Strikers. You are going to forget one day and channel where you shouldn't, and then where will we be? Running for our lives with 100 white cloaks after us." Stubborn to a fault, the other woman refused to be diverted. "I may be younger than you, but sometimes I think I know more of men than you ever will. For a man like Val and Luca, that coy little flight of yours tonight was only asking him to keep pursuing you. If you would snap his nose off the way you did the first day, he might give up. You don't tell him to stop. You do not even ask. You kept smiling at him, Nynaeve. What is the man supposed to think? You haven't smiled at anyone in days." "I am trying to hold my temper," Nynaeve muttered. Everybody complained about her temper, and now that she was trying to control it, Elaine complained about that. It was not that she was fool enough to be taken in by his compliments. She was certainly not so big a fool as that. Elaine laughed at her, and she scowled. "Oh, Nynaeve, you cannot hold the sun down at dawn. Linny could have been thinking of you." With an effort, Nynaeve smoothed her face. She could, too, hold her temper. "Didn't I just prove it out there?" So obviously RJ had no real understanding of these situations, because usually the reasons a woman keeps quiet and grins and bears it when a man is creepily persistent are due to socialization or fear of a man's reaction. And a good friend would say, "Do you want me to talk to him for you, or get the guys to talk to him for you?" But I guess I have poor emotional regulation. My anger has only an on-off switch, and everyone wants me to keep it turned off, so I must tolerate this asshole is a legitimate narrative reason, but it sure as shit didn't age well. And the point I was trying to make is that Nynaeve shows us in her response to Elaine in Chapter 34 an awareness that she is not engaging in sweet reason. Nynaeve is not the type of person who would make an effort to address others' complaints about her temper unless she felt there was some legitimacy to those complaints, at the very least deep down. And so in Chapter 49 on the river to Bowanda, when she says that all of the other women have acid tongues, but I have an even disposition, she's either regressing in her self-awareness or she's being a little bit cheeky and acknowledging that she managed to hold on to her temper because she's getting better at it, but it wasn't easy. The narrative is unclear, about as unreliable as RJ can get. Nynaeve doesn't even know, so why should we? Chapter 49 also introduces us to Nicola, Arena, and Merrigan, all of whom decide that they want to tag along to Saladar, which seems very random at this point of the story. Nynaeve has a long inner narrative about each of them, and all of the bits of herself that she sees in them, and all of them end up being super significant characters. Not just Merrigan. Nicola and Arena are as important in their own way. RJ uses their fuckery to direct 2 significant plot points. In Book 7, Nynaeve and Elaine end up going to the Sea Folk for help with the Bowl of the Winds because they can't return to the Rebels thanks to those 2 shitheads, telling Egwene, "Nynaeve and Elaine were passing themselves off as full Aes Sedai, and we're guessing you probably were too, so maybe Nicola should get extra lessons." Then the 2 leave the rebel camp in the middle of Book 10 and sneak into Tar Valon and pass on the plan to block the harbors, and therefore are directly responsible for Egwene's capture at the end of that book. But This huge chapter, chapter 49, which my Kindle tells me takes nearly an hour to read, doesn't only exist to smooth the relationships between the women or introduce us to the significant shitheads or to center Nynaeve. RJ is laying the foundation for the end. The women have been avoiding Tel Riyadh since Brigida got ripped away, but Nynaeve, the first night that they're on the ship, goes in to check for Egwene. She counts to 1,000, and every 100 she's like, Egwene, and then wakes up as quick as she can because she's so frightened. And then she cries it out. She's like, I'm so fucking sick of how scared I am. What happened with Moghedien was fucking traumatic, and she equates that with cowardice. She doesn't want to acknowledge that being afraid isn't being a coward. Being afraid and letting it stop you is being a coward. And everybody's allowed a little bit of cowardice, but asking Nynaeve to grant herself that grace would be too much. RJ has Elaine and Nynaeve use their time on the river to do a good bit of practicing in Tel Riyadh, and I don't have very much to say about that except that they go together to meet Egwene and the Wise Ones, with Nynaeve using a dream ter'angreal that takes channeling. And Egwene hints that they should meet in Shiriam's study. And it says, Nynaeve and Elaine did not hesitate. Around them, the great redstone columns changed in a blink to a small dark-paneled room, its furnishings few, plain, and sturdy. Nynaeve's anger had been wavering, and with it her hold on Saidar, but the mistress of Novice's study firmed both, stubbornly defiant indeed. She hoped that Shiriam was in Saladar. It would be a pleasure to face her on an equal footing. Which shows us how Nynaeve's vision of herself has shifted and lets us anticipate how much disappointment and regret will be on the table in Saladar. Which is funny, because she's been saying she wants to hand this over to the grown-ups, then she gets on the ship and starts helping people and making decisions and manipulating this asshole and forcing him to do things, and after a few days she tells herself it'll be nice facing Shiriam on an equal footing. It's like, Nynaeve, where do you think you're going? And, shock of shocks, they don't get the hero's welcome Nynaeve had envisioned. They're brought in front of the Saladar Six and basically made to turn out their pockets of all of their shit, and they see that, hey, the Dark One seal that they had is now broken. And Swan and Lyanna are brought to stand with them, and here the Six are talking behind a screen of air, and Nynaeve is thinking about Swan and Lyanna. And it says, it was their faces that truly stunned Nynaeve, though. She had never expected to find either alive, and certainly never looking so very young, no more than a few years older than she, if that. They did not so much as glance at one another. In truth, she thought she detected a distinct chill between them. There was another difference about them, one that Nynaeve was just beginning to recognize. If everyone, including Min, had been ginger about it, no one made any real secret of the fact that they had been stilled. Nynaeve could feel that lack. Perhaps it was being in a room where all the other women could channel, or perhaps it was knowing they had been stilled, but for the first time she was truly conscious of the ability in Elaine and the others, and its absence from Swan and Lyanna. Something had been taken from them, cut away. It was like a wound, perhaps the worst wound a woman could suffer. Curiosity overcame her. What sort of wound would it be? What had been cut away? She might as well make use of the waiting and the irritation that larded itself through her nervousness. She reached out to Saidar. Did anyone grant you permission to channel here except it? Shiriam asked, and Nynaeve gave a start, hurriedly releasing the true source. A bit later it says, Anaya said in a gently chiding voice, You have been very long from us, child. Whatever you have learned in the interval, you have apparently forgotten much. Blushing, Nynaeve curtsied. Forgive me, Aes Sedai. I did not mean to overstep. She hoped they thought it was shame that heated her cheeks. She had been away from them a long time. Just one day ago she had given the orders and people jumped when she spoke. Now she was the one expected to jump. It galled. A bit later it says, You come with disturbing news, Shiriam said, and some disturbing things. Her slightly tilted eyes wandered to the table, to the silvery Adam, and returned firmly to Elaine and Nynaeve. Since learning what it was for, most of the Aes Sedai had treated it like a live red adder. Most had. If the thing does what these children claim, Morven said absently, we need to study it, and if Elaine really believes that she can make a ter'angreal. The brown sister shook her head. Her real attention was on the flattened stone ring, all flecked and striped in red and blue and brown, that she held in one hand. The other two ter'angreal lay on her broad lap. You say that this came from Baron Sedai? How is it that this was never mentioned to us before? That was not directed at Nynaeve or Elaine, but at Swan. Swan frowned, but not the fierce frown Nynaeve remembered. It held a touch of diffidence, as if she knew she was speaking to her superiors, and so did her voice. That was another change Nynaeve could hardly believe. Varen never told me of it. I would very much like to ask her a few questions. And I have questions about this. Mirel's olive face darkened as she unfolded a familiar paper. Why had they ever kept that? And read aloud, "What the bearer does is done at my order and by my authority. Obey and keep silent at my command. Swan Sanche, Watcher of the Seals, Flame of Tarvalon, the Amerlin seat." She crumpled the paper and its seal in her fist. Hardly something to be handed out to accept it. "At the time I did not know who I could trust," Swan said smoothly. The Six Aes Sedai stared at her. "It was within my authority then." The Six Aes Sedai did not blink. Her voice took on a thread of exasperated pleading. "You cannot call me to account for doing what I had to do when I had a perfect right to do it. When the boat's sinking, you plug the hole with what you can find." "And why did you not tell us?" Sheriam asked quietly, but with a hint of steel. As mistress of novices, she had never raised her voice, though sometimes you wished she would. 3 accepted. Accepted. Sent out of the tower chasing 13 full sisters of the Black Aja. Do you use babies to plug the hole in your boat, Swan? "We are hardly babies," Nynaeve told her heatedly. "Several of those 13 are dead, and we thwarted their plans twice. In Tyr, we—" Carlinia cut her off like an icy knife. "You have told us all about Tyr, child, and Tanchico, and defeating Moghedien." Her mouth twisted wryly. She had already said that Nynaeve had been a fool to come within a mile of one of the Forsaken, that she was lucky to have escaped with her life, that Carlinia did not know how right she was. They certainly had not told everything, only made Nynaeve's stomach clench tighter. "You are children, and lucky if we decide not to spank you. Now hold your peace until you are called on to speak." Nynaeve flushed heavily, hoping they took it for embarrassment, and held her peace. Sheriam had never taken her eyes from Swan. "Well, why have you never mentioned sending 3 children out to hunt lions?" Swan drew a deep breath, but folded her hands and ducked her head penitently. "There seemed no point, Aes Sedai, with so much else of importance. I have held nothing back when there was the faintest reason for telling. Every scrap I knew of the Black Aja I told. I've not known where these 2 were or what they were up to for some time. The important thing is that they are here now and with those 3 ter'angreal. You must realize what it means to have access to Elida's study, to her papers, if only in bits. You'd never have known that she knows where you are until it was too late, except for that." "We realize that," Anaya said, eyeing Morvran, who was still frowning at the ring. "It is just that perhaps the means of it takes us a little by surprise." And then the Saladar Six are like, "Lucky you, you get to give some lessons to Aes Sedai." And Nynaeve and Elaine are like, "Great." And then they get told that Swan and Lyanna will be getting information from them, and to be nice. And fuck off. So, it says, once Nynaeve had the door closed, and could lean back against its unpainted wood, clutching the gilded coffer to her breasts, she took her first comfortable breath, or so it seemed, since entering the old stone inn. She did not want to think about the broken seal. Another broken seal. She would not. Those women could shear sheep with their eyes. She could almost look forward to watching their first meeting with the Wise Ones, if she was not likely to be squarely in the middle. It had been more than difficult when she first went to the tower, learning to do as she was told by others, to bend her neck, after long months where she gave the orders. Well, once she had consulted Elaine, usually, she did not know how she was going to learn to pull wool and scratch gravel all over again. So, that's super shitty. She got her groove back, and now it's over. But RJ won't do our girl dirty that way. She's gone through way too much shit for that. So he just gives her one last trial. A chance to rise. By throwing the biggest asshole that the light has to offer at her. It says, before Nynaeve knew it, Swan was hurrying her up rickety steps with a railing cobbled together from unpainted wood, hustling her down a rough-floored corridor to a tiny room with 2 cramped beds built into the wall, one above the other. Swan took the only stool, motioning her to sit on the lower bed. Nynaeve chose to stand, if only to show she was not going to be pushed. There was not much else in the room. A washstand with a brick propping up one leg held a chipped pitcher and basin. A few dresses hung from pegs, and what appeared to be a pallet lay rolled up in one corner. Nynaeve had fallen far in the space of a day, but Swan had fallen farther than she could imagine. She did not think she would have too much trouble with the woman, even if Swan did still have the same eyes. Swan sniffed. "Suit yourself, then, girl. The ring, it doesn't require channeling?" "No, you heard me tell Sheriam. Anyone can use it. A woman who can't channel. A man? Possibly a man. ter'angreal that did not need the power usually work for men or women. For any woman, yes. Then you are going to teach me to use it." Nynaeve raised one eyebrow. This might be a lever to get what she wanted. If not, she had another. Maybe. "Do they know about this? All the talk was of showing them how it works. You were never mentioned." "They don't know." Swan did not appear shaken at all. She even smiled, and not pleasantly. "And they won't.
Else they'll learn you and Elaine have been posing as full sisters since you left Tarvalin. Moraine might be letting Egwene get away with it. If she hasn't tried it too, I don't know a bar knot from a running hitch. But Sheriam, Carlinia, they'll have you squealing like a spawning grunter before they're done. Long before. That's ridiculous. Nynaeve realized she was sitting on the edge of the bed. She did not remember sitting down. Tom and Julian would hold their tongues. No one else knew. She had to talk to Elaine. We haven't pretended anything of the sort. Don't lie to me, girl. If I needed confirmation, your eyes gave it. Your stomach is turning somersaults, isn't it? It most certainly was. Of course not. If I teach you anything, it's because I want to. She was not going to let this woman bully her. The last vestige of pity winked out. If I do, I want something in return. To study you and Lyanna. I want to know if Stilling can be healed. It can't, Swan said flatly. Now, anything short of death should be. Should be isn't is, girl. Lyanna and I were promised we would be left alone. Speak to Faolain or Amara if you want to know what happens to anyone who molests us. They weren't the first or the worst, but they cried the longest. Her other lever, near panic, had driven it out of her head, if it existed. One glance. What would Sheriam say if she knew you and Lyanna weren't ready to tear out each other's hair at all? Swan just looked at her. They think you're tame, don't they? The more you snap at anybody who can't snap back, the more they take it for proof when you leap to obey every time an Aes Sedai coughs. Was a little cringing all it took to make them forget the two of you worked hand in hand for years? Or did you convince them Stilling had changed everything about you, not just your face? When they find out you've been scheming behind their backs, manipulating them, you'll howl louder than any grunter, whatever that is. Not so much as a blink. Swan was not going to lose her temper and let any admission slip out, yet there had been something in that brief look. Nynaeve was sure of it. I want to study you, and Lyanna, whenever I want, and Logain. Perhaps she could learn something there as well. Men were different. It would be like looking at the problem from another angle. Not that she would heal him even if she discovered how. Rand's channeling was necessary. She was not about to loose another man on the world who could wield the power. If not, then you can forget about the ring and tell Iron Riyadh. What was Swan after there? Probably just to revisit something that at least seemed like being Aes Sedai. Nynaeve stamped firmly on momentarily rekindled pity. And if you make any claims about us pretending to be Aes Sedai, then I'll have no choice but to tell about you and Lyanna. Elaine and I might be uncomfortable until the truth comes out, but it will, and the truth will make you weep as long as Faolain and Amara together. Silence stretched. How did the other woman manage to look so cool? Nynaeve had always thought it had to do with being Aes Sedai. Her lips felt dry, the only part of her that did. If she was wrong, if Swan was willing to put it to the test, she knew who would be weeping. Finally Swan muttered, I hope Moraine has managed to keep Egwene's backbone more supple than this. Nynaeve did not understand, but she hardly had time to consider it. The next instant the other woman was leaning forward, hand outstretched. You keep my secrets and I will keep yours. Teach me the ring and you can study stilling and gentling to your heart's content. Nynaeve barely managed to hold in a relieved sigh as she clasped the offered hand. She had done it. For the first time in what seemed forever, someone had tried to bully her and failed. She almost felt ready to face Moghedien. Almost. And that's glorious foreshadowing, because it's while Nynaeve's teaching Swan that Moghedien shows herself again. And I like R.J. pitting our two bully protagonists against each other to see who will emerge the victor. But Nynaeve isn't a bully at heart. She is just a young woman with a temper problem who doesn't want to be pushed around and isn't the best at taking responsibility for her emotions or admitting when she's at fault. But she's getting better, and once she gets to a place where she doesn't need to be constantly angry to survive, she becomes less and less prone to bulldozing people. And it's almost like RJ shows us Swan Sanche, a true bully, so we can see the difference between someone who resorts to bullying when her temper short-circuits her reason and someone who does it out of habit and because it works. Nynaeve's story in the Fires of Heaven is a tale that could stand alone, but all of Book 5's plotlines intersect. Rand needs her in the climax of this book, and perhaps his ta'veren pulling calls her to save his life. Who knows? But she catches Moghedien spying on the daytime lesson that she's giving Swan and Tel'aran'rhiod. Riyadh. They start out being combative and shitty with each other, shocking I know, and escalate to a ground fight where they wrestle in the dust. And Nynaeve gets a glimpse of Moghedien after they stop fighting. Moghedien found the fight a little too entertaining and just had to get a better look. And after Swan refuses to go back, Nynaeve unceremoniously ends the lesson by yanking the ter'angreal off her neck, so Swan wakes out of the world of dreams. But Nynaeve does not step out. Instead, she moves to the town of Jareen, where they reboarded a ship going down the Aranon after spending the night on the shore in Cairien when their earlier ship got caught up on a sunken boat, and they meet Avienda and Bane and Chiad and get captured by brigands and are rescued by the Aiel, and then get on the Darter to finish their journey to Tyr in Book 3. And it says, why had she jumped to Jareen? That was simple and answered as soon as she thought of it. Jareen was the one place she knew well enough to leap to and tell Rhiad that she could be sure Moghedien did not know. They had been there for an hour before Moghedien knew she existed, and she was sure neither she nor Elaine had ever mentioned it again until Rhiad or awake. But that left another question, the same one in a way. Why Jareen? Why not step out of the dream, wake up in her own bed, such as it was, if washing dishes and scrubbing floors on top of everything had not left her so weary she slept right on? I can still step out. Moghedien had seen her in Saladar, if that had been Moghedien. Moghedien knew Saladar now. I can tell Sheriam. How? Admit she was teaching Swan? She was not supposed to have her hands on those Terangriel except with Sheriam and the other Aes Sedai. How Swan got hold of them when she wanted, Nynaeve did not know. No, she was not afraid of more hours up to her elbows in hot water. She was afraid of Moghedien. Anger burned in her belly fiercely. She wished she had some goosemen out of her scrip of herbs. I am so bloody tired of being afraid. And a bit further it says, that was why she had fled here instead of leaving Rhiad. Afraid and angry at being afraid. Too angry to think straight, to consider her own weakness. She would step out of the dream. Whatever Swan's scheme had been, it was done. She would have to take her chances right along with Nynaeve. The thought of more hours scrubbing floors tightened her hand on her braid. Days, more likely, and maybe Sheriam's switch besides. They might never let her near one of the dream Terangriel again, or any Terangriel. They would set Faolain over her instead of Theodrin, a finish to studying Swan and Lyanna, much less Logain, maybe a finish to studying healing. In a fury she channeled another flame. If it was a whit stronger she could not see it. So much for trying to crank her anger and hope it would help. There's nothing for it but to just tell them I saw Moghedien, she muttered, yanking her braid hard enough to hurt. Light they will give me to Faolain. I'd almost rather die. But you seem to enjoy running little errands for her. That mocking voice pulled Nynaeve up off the bench like hands on her shoulders. Moghedien stood in the street, all in black, shaking her head at what she saw. With all her strength, Nynaeve wove a shield of spirit and hurled it between the other woman and Saidar. Tried to hurl it between. It was like chopping at a tree with a paper hatchet. Moghedien actually smiled before she bothered to slice Nynaeve's weave, and that as casually as brushing a bite-me away from her face. Nynaeve stared at her as though poleaxed. After everything, it came down to this. The one power useless. All the anger bubbling inside her useless. All her plans, her hopes, useless. Moghedien did not bother to strike back. She did not even bother to channel a shield of her own. That was how much contempt she had. I was afraid you had seen me. I grew careless when you and Swan started killing each other. With your hands. Moghedien gave a belittling laugh. She was weaving something lazily, because there was no reason to hurry. Nynaeve did not know what it was, yet she wanted to scream. Fury seethed inside her, but fear dulled her wits, rooted her feet to the ground. Sometimes I think you were all too ignorant even to train, you and the former Amyrlin seat and all the rest, but I cannot allow you to betray me. That weave was reaching out for her. It is time to collect you at last, it seems. And then Birgitte, who put on the stone dream Terangriel and drank Nynaeve's drugged tea after Swan woke up early and indicated something wasn't right, pops up and surprises Moghedien, who turns her into a child, while Nynaeve crawls toward her, fake pleading, until she gets close enough to be able to leash her with an Adam of thought. RJ does some of his most satisfying work in Rhiad specifically through Nynaeve's eyes. Here she's forced to apply ingenuity because she has no strength. She's using one of the Terangriel that required channeling, and so she has no extra power. She has to make use of the actual world of dreams, which for all of Moghedien's dreaming talent, she's a better dreamer even than Lanfear, her hubris, the hubris of villains everywhere who take the time to villain monologue, mwahaha, so that heroes can do whatever they've got to come from behind and save the day. Moghedien's hubris is that she underestimates Nynaeve and doesn't imagine that she could think outside the box and utilize Rhiad itself. And I think Nynaeve's good at that because she so often doesn't have the power to hand, and so is used to having to use alternative means. And so she captures her with the Adam and makes her put Birgitte back to rights. And then it says, "Before you consider anything drastic," Moghedien said, "remember that I know much that would be useful to you. I have observed the other chosen, peeked into their schemes. Is that not worth something? Tell me, and I will consider whether it's worth anything, Nynaeve said. What can she do with the woman? Lanfear, Grendel, Ravin, and Samael are plotting together. Nynaeve gave the leash a short tug, staggering her. I know that. Tell me something new. The woman was captive here, but the Adam only existed so long as they were in Tel Riyadh. Do you know they are drawing Rand al'Thor to attack Samael? But when he does, he will find the others as well, waiting to trap him between them. At least he will find Grendel and Ravin. I think Lanfear plays another game, one the others know nothing about. Nynaeve exchanged worried glances with Birgitte. Rand must learn of this. He would, as soon as she and Elaine could speak to Egwene tonight, if they could manage to put their hands on the ter'angreal long enough. That is, Moghedien murmured, if he lives long enough to find them. Nynaeve took hold of the silvery leash where it joined the collar and pulled the Forsaken's face close to hers. Dark eyes met her gaze flatly, but she could feel anger through the Adam, and fear wriggling up and being stamped down. You listen to me. Do you think I don't know why you are pretending to be so cooperative? You think if you keep talking long enough I will make some mistake and you can escape. You think the longer we talk, the harder I'll find it to kill you. That much was true enough. To kill somebody in cold blood, even one of the Forsaken, would be hard, maybe harder than she could manage. What was she going to do with the woman? But you understand this. I won't allow hinting at things. If you try keeping anything back from me, I will do to you everything you ever thought of doing to me. Dread, creeping through the leash like bone-chilling shrieks deep in Moghedien's mind. Maybe she did not know as much about Adam as Nynaeve thought. Maybe she believed Nynaeve could read her thoughts if she tried. Now, if you know of some threat to Rand, something ahead of Samael and the others, you tell me, now. Words spilled from Moghedien's mouth, and her tongue flickered out to wet her lips continually. al'Thor means to go after Ravin. Today, this morning, because he thinks Ravin killed Morghese. I don't know whether he did or not, but al'Thor believes it. But Ravin never trusted Lanfear. He never trusted any of them. Why should he? He thought it all might be some trap set for him, so he has laid a trap of his own. He has set wards through Caemlyn, so if a man channels a spark, he will know. al'Thor will walk right into it. He almost certainly already has. I think he meant to leave Caerhien right after sunrise. And then she's like, I didn't do it. I didn't have anything to do with it. So Nynaeve takes Moghedien and goes to Caemlyn. And Birgitte, before waking up, makes the fair point that nothing she can do will affect anything in the waking world, but Nynaeve feels a desperate need to do something, so she goes, Moghedien in tow. Luckily for Rand, because Ravin flees into Tel Riyadh, where he is infinitely more knowledgeable and more powerful than Rand, because Rand doesn't know the rules. And Nynaeve is there with Moghedien to assist. And Rand needs the help. When she finally comes across him and Ravin, Rand is in a trap, where he's turning into some kind of beast, and I don't know if Ravin actually laid a trap with saidin, or whether he's making use of the capacities of the world of dreams to change Rand, but Ravin is turning Rand into something that can't channel. And Nynaeve ends up needing help too. It says, she filled the corridor around him with fire from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, pouring into it all of saidar she held, fire so hot the stone itself smoked. The heat made her flinch back. Ravin screamed in the middle of the flame. It was one flame, and staggered away from her, back to where the hallway became a columned walk. A heartbeat, less, while she still flinched, and he stood inside the flame, but surrounded by clear air. Every scrap of saidar she could channel was going into that inferno, but he held it at bay. She could see him through the fire. It gave everything a red cast, but she could see. Smoke rose from his charred coat. His face was a seared ruin, one eye milky white, but both eyes were malevolent as he turned them on her. No emotion reached her along the Adam's leash, only leaden dullness. Nynaeve's stomach fluttered. Moghedien had given up because death was there for them. And then there's a page break, and it says, fire thrust through the carved window screens above Rand, fingers of it filling every hole, dancing toward the colonnade. As it did, the struggle within him ceased abruptly. He was himself so suddenly it was almost a shock. He had been drawing desperately at saidin, trying to hold on to some of it. Now it rushed into him, an avalanche of fire and ice that made his knees buckle, made the void tremble with pain that shaved at it like a lathe. And Ravin stumbled backward, out onto the colonnade, face turned to something inside. Ravin wreathed in fire, yet somehow standing as though untouched. If untouched now, it had not been so before. Only the size of the figure, the impossibility of it being anyone else, told Rand it was him. The Forsaken was a figure of charred, cracked red flesh that would have strained any healer to mend. The agony of it must have been overwhelming, except that Ravin would be inside the void within that burned remnant of a man, wrapped in emptiness where the body's pain was distant and saidin close at hand. saidin raged inside Rand, and he loosed it all, not to heal. "Robin!" he screamed, and balefire flew from his hands, molten light thicker than a man, driven by all the power he could draw. It struck the Forsaken, and Robin ceased to exist. The Darkhounds and Rhuidean had become motes before they vanished, whatever kind of life they had had, struggling to continue, or the pattern struggling to maintain itself even for them. Before this, Robin simply ceased. Teamwork makes the dream work. Robert Jordan, in a book of massive ups and downs, mostly downs, for Nynaeve, after everything in Saladar was such a letdown, gives her a truly satisfying win, and lets Nynaeve end on a super triumphant note over her nemesis, making Moghedien drink a great big cup of fork root. It says, Nynaeve watched her. That much should put her down quickly. Yet a cruel streak made her speak. She knew it was cruel and did not care. Moghedien should not have any quiet rest at all. You knew Birgitte was not dead. Moghedien's gaze narrowed slightly. You knew who Faolain is. The other woman's eyes tried to widen, but she was already drowsy. Nynaeve could feel the fork root's effects spreading. She concentrated on Moghedien, held there until Iran Riyadh. No easy sleep for one of the Forsaken. And you knew who Swan is, that she used to be the Amerlin's seat. I've never mentioned that until Iran Riyadh. Never. I'll see you very shortly. In Saladar. Wah, wah, wah. Like a boss. Book 5 gives a beautiful exploration of the internal conflicts that Nynaeve has, and gives her a chance to begin to work through some of them, before she heals Stilling, before she makes miracles. It presents her in all her glory and imperfections, at her worst and at her best. RJ has her do what is for Nynaeve an amazing amount of growth, and the proof of how far she progresses is this. After Book 5, there are significantly fewer times that I feel inclined to impatiently dismiss Nynaeve as a stubborn asshole who embodies several of my least favorite traits in people. There are still times. She's going to be on the struggle bus all through Lord of Chaos and well into Book 7, and she's always going to be Nynaeve. But a Nynaeve who learns and shows personal growth is a person I can give some grace to, and I am so grateful that we've gotten to this place in the series with her. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. The rough draft to this episode was more than 3 hours long. Normally I'd expect to split an episode like that into 2, but as Galad says in this book, it's on brand for Nynaeve to not do things the way that someone would expect. If you want to listen to that rough draft, it's available on Patreon. It was uploaded 2 weeks before this one, and you'll be able to see how it improved, what I added, and what I cut out. There was a lot more subtracting than adding this time. If you'd like to support the show and have access to that or other fun content, there's a link in the show notes. There are other links to my Discord and to my email, etc., to my YouTube, and to my Twitter handle, @PodOfTheDragon. There's also a link to Apple Podcasts. If you could go and review me there, or else on whatever other platform you're listening on, I would really appreciate it because it will help other people find me. And so will word of mouth. So if you know anyone who likes the Wheel of Time and might be interested in a different kind of podcast, please tell them about me. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. My name is Morgan. And for some reason I've always imagined that when Nynaeve, Elaine, and Birgitte find Moghedien and Saladar, they wake her up with a blanket party. I can't imagine anybody who deserves it more.